and we will do so for the foreseeable future until that order is changed, that mandate is changed. So we're going to get started. We're going to move on the agenda, item number 2 up to item number 1, as we have members of the Holliston Public Schools Administration and the Holliston Public School Committee, well, the School Committee of the Holliston Public Schools here present with us. So we're going to move right into the Karazak Arbor Programmatic update. And I think what we'll do is have Chief Cassie join us at the board table first.
Sure.
Just going A to B there.
I'm just going to pull up, just go through the Arbor steering's recent meeting.
Yes, thank
okay. Pull up here on the screen an update. So the ARPA steering group asked for all community organizations to submit requests for a soft deadline of August 2nd. The request form is still live and anybody can be making a request, but we asked for that so that the ARPA steering group would then have an ability to start reviewing the requests. As of last week, the ARPA steering group got through all of the requests that came in by that soft deadline. We have requests that have come in since then, and we will schedule times as we move forward. So just a very quick update. If it has a action taken in the right-hand column, that means that it has come to the select board through the ARPA steering group. The recommendation is in the second to right column with a vote taken by the ARPA steering group. A few of these have a deferral to another funding source. And so the ARPA steering group will hear back at a future date when those requesters do the due diligence that that was requested of them. The one that we have on the agenda tonight was discussed last week. At the time that a vote was taken, 2 of the members were not there, and so I do have some feedback from them. But at this point, it is when the school committee made a request, which was previously discussed by the select board and approved for full day kindergarten. The superintendent actually had a second request that came in at the exact same time. And because of prioritizing things that were time sensitive, the ARPA steering group had not reviewed that until this past week. And is for repairing COVID SEL and learning gaps for HPA students. So this is a summary of all the requests that we've received to date. And the one in yellow here is the one that is on our agenda this evening. And that's what our colleagues from the school committee are here to discuss. Any questions on the general approach of the ARPA steering group?
So there was a recommendation from the ARPA steering group. At that point in time, it was 4 members who were present to take the vote, and it was a 4-0 vote in favor of making the recommendation for the $106,000 to the select board.
Yes, so we had 1 member who had to leave and was able to ask a question, which we can reiterate here tonight in discussion. And that was John Cronin. And then we had 1 member who was not present. That was Ken Shada, who I asked, and I made clear in the meeting I would solicit any questions that he had for discussion tonight, so that you would all have that benefit of that discussion before you taking action.
Okay, so we have tonight the chair and we have the chair of the school committee. We have Keith Uday from the school's finance office, and we have the superintendent of the Holliston Public Schools, Dr. Karazak, present, as they did before with the recommendation to approve full day kindergarten. They gave a quick presentation, a quick introduction to the request and why they were asking for it. So I'd like to give Dr. Karazak or Keith Uday or Cynthia Lestevnik the opportunity to make a presentation to the board and to listeners on the call. Not sure who would like to take that, but if you'd like to have the opportunity to present the request, please do so.
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that if I can't see anyone else in the room except for the board. Is that okay?
Yes, please. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us. So yes, we did ask for the 100,000, and I'll clarify some questions that came my way regarding how this money would be used differently from existing budgetary funds. So I don't have a formal presentation, but what we need is to extend time on learning, to lengthen the school day before and after school. We are looking for some of our students that are going to require, in particular, some more social emotional learning that we won't be able to fit into the normal school hours, as well as some potential math and literacy interventions before and after school at all 4 buildings. And we really feel that for a small percentage of our students that have additional gaps, some of them we believe with the remote learning models may have more gaps. We're still doing the assessments, and we're going to be giving STAR reading and literacy assessments in order to determine by the end of December what kind of gaps we're seeing and which of our children are most impacted. And in addition, we have our new director of SEL and equity, and he's putting together some potential ways to assess which kids might have more trauma right now to work on some SEL before and after school. We believe this is really just one-time funds for this school year, just to catch up some of our students and just settle them down from some of the, just from the stress that they went through the last year and a half related to COVID. In our existing budget, we already have math and literacy tutors at the elementary schools. We don't have them at the upper grade levels. And we added in our existing budget this year some additional math tutoring because we have literacy tutors within the budget and we had less math tutoring at Placentino and Miller. So that is in our existing budget, and that's an ongoing need that we see as a long-term need for our school system. We're looking at these to supplement and do more, really more of extending the day for some of our students who really cannot get all of their needs met within the existing day related to where they are in the school year and from the past year and a half of experiences.
Dr. Karazak, is it fair to say that these are needs that were identified over the past recent months, that they were not necessarily known as you were developing the budget for May town meeting? It sounds like you did not have the SEL director in place at that time. Right,
and also we did pilot the STAR reading and math assessment in the spring. And we are going to be looking at that data and also the benchmark data from the beginning of the school year that we're going to be administering this month. And I also have a new assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, as you know, she also started July 1. So she and Jariel Vernea are working hand in hand to help get these interventions off the ground. And that's why we felt that the ARPA funding would be the best way to get these funds very quickly into our teachers' hands to do some before and after school interventions. We thought it would be a good time to use the assessments, and then October to May would be when we would be doing these interventions, rather than waiting until we have more information with our students and let more time go by. With these STAR assessments and others that you're doing now that the school year is back in session, are you starting to see information coming in to tell you the extent to which there are learning gaps? And is that something you could perhaps share with the community who's listening to this call, what you might be seeing if you have any data to do so? I don't have enough data right now to give you that information. And that's why we wanted to get the data by the end of September so that we can start the interventions in mid-October. In all honesty, I really suspect that we may put more of the money towards our social emotional learning, because that's where I feel a lot of our kids are more impacted. And, I'm hearing that some of the people that have been able to assess their students, because we didn't have STAR in place and other districts have had that assessment tool in place for a number of years. So they have a little more data in that particular assessment than we will have. We do have ongoing data such as DIBELS and other programs at the elementary that we will be using in addition, but it's really, because the school year has just started, we haven't had time to get the benchmark data for the beginning of the year to really know which kids we're going to be targeting. But to be the real area that I see that has not been delved into is the social emotional learning. And that's why I believe we'll end up putting more of the funds towards that than the math and literacy interventions, because we do have some time during the school day to work on the interventions for math and literacy. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll let the board ask questions, and then members of the Zoom call or here in the room ask some questions, if you're okay with that, Dr. Karazak? Sure. Thank you. John?
I don't have any questions, but a couple of remarks. I did join briefly the steering group this past week, as Travis indicated, for about the first half hour, then I timed out. Had to go to another meeting, but this particular request just stands out again, as the last one did from the schools, as perfect fit with the ARPA intent. If we have to fund anything out of ARPA, learning gaps for children have to be at the top of the list. So I expressed my support for it. I could take a vote. I made two other remarks, and this is on the financial side. This is not meant to judge what's coming our way, but with this commitment plus the other school commitment, we will be committing quite a lot of money of our total 4.4 million towards schools at a very, very early stage of the grant. So I asked the steering group to consider, as I said, pumping the brakes on the expectations of how much money to start awarding to the various requests that are coming down the road. It's not to say we won't do it. I just think we need to slow the roll. And to that end, Travis, I think you may have addressed it with the group after I left, but I think I heard you might be meeting less frequently. perhaps sometime in October at this point.
Yes, I think the next date will probably be in early October, and I've had a follow up with one of the requesters that came in after August, the soft deadline of August 2nd. We let them know that at the next available meeting we'll get them on the agenda, but we don't think that's going to be until October. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, I just have a couple of quick questions. I do agree that this is a kind of a no-brainer with ARPA. I think it's something that is specifically the type of program that ARPA is made for to help kids in adjusting to post-COVID. And so I don't have any objections to the nature of it. I just want to get a little bit into the specifics. And so I have two questions. The first is that is this going to be paying for specific programs or materials, or what exactly is it the money being spent on, I guess is the question I have.
Yeah, so honestly, some of it is for transportation, because getting the kids before and after school to home, we want to make sure that they have an equitable opportunity to be there. If we see some kids that have needs and they don't have transportation of their own, we would want to get them bus transportation. So in that October to May timeline with the 4 buildings, we're allocating approximately 60,000 of that would go towards transportation. And then the other 40,000 would be to do 2 hours a week for each small group. And we would have 5 teachers or 5 instructional leaders per school. So that's 20 people over that 8-month period doing interventions, and potentially up to 6 to 7 kids maybe per group. And that would be 10,000 per building for the actual time that the teachers would be doing the before and after school work. And the resources, we feel we can use resources that we already have existing within our school and the materials that we have. So we're not looking to purchase any additional resources with it.
Okay, so that was actually going to be my other question. And it looks like there's some of this is going to be paying for additional staffing, additional hours for some folks to present this program to the kids. Okay. All right, that's all I have. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming in to talk about this.
Dr. Karazak, how many students do you anticipate will, when you talk about the 2 hours per week per group, how many students do you anticipate being able to serve through that type of a program or those types of opportunities?
So if we do as I said, approximately 6 to 7 kids per group, we don't want the groups to be too large because we really want to be very strategic with the work that these children need. If we did 7 per group times 5 groupings, that's 35 per school. So we'd have about 140 students that would be accessing this through the 4 buildings. And again, it may not flesh out that way depending on the data that we gather. We may end up saying, well, we need 7 groups at one building and only 3 at another. I mean, we'll really use that. We're not going to just assume that it's going to be 5 at each building. We just use that as a ballpark, knowing that we can shift those groups to where the higher need is.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody here in the room who would like to ask a question of this request? Okay, is there anybody on the Zoom call who would like to either make a question or a comment? Okay, I have one from a hand up from Chief Cassidy. Go ahead.
It's not a question, just a statement, as we've done with previous ARPA requests that have come to the board after being recommended by the working group. Just a reminder that the category in the interim final rule from Treasury that we felt aligned with this request. In this particular case, it was addressing educational disparities. And as Mr. Cronin indicated there, it absolutely aligns with the intent of the recovery program from the federal government through the state to the local. And also, I do want to emphasize for everyone who may be listening that this was a one-time request for this current school year. This, unlike the other requests, this is not projected to extend into future school years as through this request.
Thank you. And Travis, we're having a little bit more of a robust discussion on this particular request because, as you mentioned, it was a 4-0 vote. There were 2 members of the steering group who were not there at the end of the meeting when the vote was taken. You referred to some questions, you referenced some questions that you got from steering group members. Is there anything you'd like to share?
No, I think the superintendent answered it, but yeah, just so that we reference the fact that one of the members who, apologized for not being able to be there. The question was, they saw a similar learning gap item on a May 6th budget presentation that referenced learning gaps for, I believe, $86,000. So his question was, is this the same request? Is this a variation of it? And I think that the superintendent led off with that, but is there anything else to add to that, Dr. Karazak?
Yeah, in case I didn't clarify well enough. So we're looking as the math tutors as more of a long-term need because we have, right now we had more literacy tutors in our buildings in our younger levels than we did math. So that we're trying to catch up and really balance that out in our normal offerings of interventions throughout the school year. So we foresee that as a long-term need. And this is the more shorter-term need that really is about extending the school day for kids that just need a little bit more that they can't fit in. I mean, as you know, we don't have the kids that long during the day, and trying to fit all of this in and then catch them up quickly is challenging within the existing schedules that we have, especially at the middle school and high school. We have even less opportunity sometimes to do so. So that's why we really feel it needs to be addressed in a before or after school model, depending on the grade level.
Okay, and Travis, so just to come back to John's comment about, again, not that this is the main point, but where the dollars are going from ARPA. At this point, the schools would have received, if this is approved, it'd be about 40% of our ARPA funds.
Including the life of the full day K?
Yeah, not for just this upcoming year.
That's correct.
Right, okay. All right. That seems totally in line with the large size of the schools and the number of students who have been impacted by the pandemic. And this is one of our greatest areas of need in our town, is addressing the needs of our students, their educational needs. I just have to say, as a parent of 3 now school-age kids, I greatly appreciate the fact that this is all 4 schools, and you're pivoting, it sounds like, to address this social emotional learning aspect of it. That speaks close to my heart, and knowing that need is there. So I just want to say personally, I think it's a great request that you've made, and I think we're ready to take a vote on it. So I will entertain a motion to approve $106,000 for the school's request. I'm sure I'm getting it right, for repairing COVID's social emotional learning and learning gaps for Holliston public school students.
Second.
All right, so I guess I made the motion and John seconded. So all in favor?
Aye.
No, we do not know. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so that's 3-0 in favor. Thank you, Dr. Cuskett. We have you here, so we're going to go out of order again to number 6, which is the Fall Town Meeting Capital Request article. And I'm not putting Dr. Cuskett on the spot here, but we have, again, many members of the school committee and the Holliston Public Schools Administration. So if any one of you would like to
So I'll allow our assistant superintendent for finance and operations to address the request for the capital.
Okay.
Let's see if you can make it over all the wires.
What are you doing?
I don't know where to go. I don't know where to go. I'll go sit next to my.
Good evening, Mr. Bonet. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Yes, what the school committee voted on unanimously was to make a request for $500,000 to be able to set aside funds for doing rooftop units. We have, if you think of all of the rooftop units, including the ventilation units, the energy recovery units, the heating units, the ones that have air conditioning, which is in the 12-month spaces, and the auditoriums, we have 30 units up on all of our buildings. And to say that they're in some cases beyond their useful life would be a fair statement. We've done a good job so far taking care of them, which is how we got them to this age. That being said, 2 of our larger units have struggled over the last few years, and they're reaching the point where I'm actually getting nervous about it. And so we do have a history of replacing items when they break, as opposed to a preemptive way or a prescriptive way if we got that far to design an actual replacement plan. This request is not based on replacing the way it's currently broken. It's based around either setting aside money in case something breaks, because we wouldn't want to have to lose a space, or to, again, in a more preemptive way of replacing it at that point, of doing it even though it's still working.
You are running out of the ability to fix these because of parts that are no longer accessible.
Right. The vendor we use when it becomes more than my maintenance staff can handle. We have an outside contractor that comes in and does some work on that. And he has been pulling parts from other units as he decommissions them to be able to use in Holliston, because he knows, he's told me on a number of occasions, that, you know, we have the oldest units that he ever works on. It's probably in about 25 or 30 schools. And we have units that, again, had these replaced in other places. But again, we service them completely annually. We're up there all the time. I mean, the chief knows, you know, my maintenance staff is up there frequently as he's driving past. So again, we're taking good care of them, which is how we got them to get this far. But we're really at the end now.
So would this be approved at town meeting? There's no purchase order to follow necessarily, but you're planning for an eventuality where you will be buying.
There will be, and again, we have a back of the envelope type of quote, just because again, we're not sure which one would go first or whatever. And truthfully, I've had vendors over the years complain because we asked them to draw up a formal quote for something that I have to go out and bid for. So they sometimes get tired of doing that type of work. So we experienced that with our boilers most recently. So I do have a back of the envelope for around $500,000 for either the middle school or the high school, plus or minus a little bit. So again, that's where we're setting that aside. Could we lose any of the other units, which would range in price from $30,000 to $50,000 up to $150,000, depending on the size of the unit and whether it's just heat or just ventilation or both? Yes.
Okay. And Travis, this flows through the capital improvement plan, and that's.
Yes, so this has been the request, and when I asked Keith previously, you know, what is the next thing and what should we have? So when we presented the May capital budget article, you know, we put in there for context what we thought was probably coming in October, and this was the request that we foresaw based on Keith's thing of, you know, what is the capital item that keeps you up at night, and this is the one that keeps Keith up at night. And so we had that on there as forecasting. That is the one that they're requesting now. It's on the 5-year capital plan. And so just for anybody reading along at home, we're currently under item 6A, the capital request article that we'll discuss later, but since we have school staff with us. And so, yes, this would fall into the 5-year capital plan for the town and schools, and it would fall into the capital request budget article that we have in May and October town meetings.
John, any comments or questions?
Yeah, I have a few questions. So this item has been on the town's capital plan for a while, right? You put this in
probably a decade.
The concept. Has the capital subcommittee delved into this issue with any detail?
I believe that Keith and the budget subcommittee, the school committee, will be meeting with the capital subcommittee whenever they schedule a meeting.
Some of the questions that sort of emerged when it first came in, I was pinging Cindy and Keith today. When I hear rooftop in anything, whether it's a rooftop units, one of the things I think the schools need to focus on, this is more of a longer term issue, is rooftop solar units. The application of a solar unit in the school can generate revenue that can help pay for the capital improvement. Keith passed along today the age of the roofs involved with the school system. I think it's safe to say all of them, Placentino, Miller, Adams, and the high school, including the auditorium, are all well beyond useful life. Do you have any problems with the roofs right now, or any of them leaking?
I mean, we repair the leak to make our flat roofs leak. I mean, it's you know, you have seams. It's a membrane roof that has a series of seams that again give way from time to time. Or with a rooftop unit, again, they had to cut into the roof, place the rooftop unit in. Those will give way. When you know the beauty of ceiling tiles are that when they turn brown, you know, you have a leak, so you have a place to attack. So again, we maintain those. My maintenance guys are up there doing that. When it's a significant one, we do sometimes use an outside contract.
The reason I'm asking is because this is the space where I think a facility manager has to be heard from a little bit, because, and I'm not an expert, I don't know if you are, but personally, I would think replacing a roof would come first, and then the rooftop units would go second or at the same time. If we approve this, you put rooftop units on, you have a roof failure, you're gonna have to pay a crane operator to come back and take those units off, assemble them, put the new roof on, reapply them over the life cycle of the unit. Is that correct?
No, because they're attached to steel girders in the space, so they would not be impacted by having to replace like the whole roof deck.
So the ballasting system that holds the rooftop units would not be impacted by any new roof? I'd like to see that. I've not seen that before. But in anyways, my point is the school's roofs are obviously in need of replacement as well. Are those in the capital plan?
On the 5-year year?
When is the next When's the next roof coming in, if you happen to know off the top of your head?
I mean, it's probably gonna be Placentino and probably within the next year to 18 months.
And then finally, the high school auditorium, and I think you wrote the Adams Auditorium would be the place where these units would go, correct?
Yes, one or the other.
I'd really like to see the $500,000 number validated a little bit more through something other than a back of the envelope, but that's just me. I support the request. I think we need to be doing this, don't get me wrong. Money's important to put into the asset. I'm just questioning from a facilities perspective, what's the right sequence and are we attacking this to the right value approach? That's all. Those are my thoughts. And then ultimately, when we get the roofs on, put some solar panels up there and generate some money.
Once the buildings are paid off.
I think we're getting close on that.
No, we are.
If I'm not mistaken, most of them are all paid off.
Yeah, just the high school, middle school still has another year and a half to go. So
yeah, that's correct. So I'm good. Okay.
The only question I have here is that we're not actually talking about an actual replacement. We're just talking about setting aside money in case we need it. Again, it can go either way. Okay. And again, it hasn't been our practice to replace something that's not broken. The two major rooftop units, when I lose a space, yes, I'd lose an auditorium, but I would not lose classrooms. The classrooms are heated and ventilated through the unit ventilators that are in all the classrooms. Any of the smaller heating units themselves or ventilating units themselves do the hallways as opposed to those large spaces. And if we were to lose a heating unit within a hallway, I wouldn't lose a section of the school. I would lose heat in that space, which we would provide supplemental heat, turn up the heat in the classroom. I mean, we'd have mitigation, strategies for us. Okay. How long does it take to if you needed to replace one, like you had an emergency, would it take you get a month? Oh no, it'd be longer than that. The bid process itself would take on the order of 2 to 3 weeks alone. Okay. To be able to reserve a crane to put it up there to disassemble, we're talking 2 to 3 months. Easy. I guess 3 months will be on that.
That's outside of supply chain issues that we're currently dealing with.
That's a whole separate conversation though. So if, let's say, is this just going to be set aside until there's a breakage, or is there like sort of a program where we would say, after say in May, hypothetically, we've done well, we don't have any breakage, are we just going to say, okay, let's allocate this to replace the most vulnerable ones over the summer, something like that, or is it just going to be held in perpetuity until breaking? I would say that it's probably closer to the first option, okay, as opposed to the second, just because I know this is coming, and it's really trying to see how they behave this winter. Yeah. In all honesty, it's really a question of push and pull a little bit too, and as well as I don't want to replace one and have the other one fail. Right. I mean, I rather personally, just for my own personal opinion, I would rather see you, hold that money aside, and then like in May, you say, what, these two units that are the oldest, they're from the 60s or whatever, century it was.
2001.
But you can, and then you say, let's just replace these over the summer, and then let's start a replacement program, because I think we should get to a point where we have a replacement program, so that way we're not, we're ahead of the game, and we're instead of, but that's just my personal opinion. No, I think this is a no-brainer. We've tried to be good stewards. We're the largest budget in town, we know that. We try to be good stewards with the town's money, which is why we don't get ahead and throw away things that are working. And so as part of that, I don't disagree. We also have to make sure we stay up in operation. Sure. And so it's that, push pull on that again, where, which do you do? I think we're at the point where it's time to move that forward a little bit. Yeah, and I'd like to see it in the capital plan as like, what, we're going to set aside $500,000. We're going to do 10 units and whatever, whatever the right program is to try to get to a point where we can have the units. And I think that's what's happening for the capital plan. And that's what I'd love to see. So because they're all in there. Travis had them all, so. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So Mike, I guess jumping on what John had to say, it's very clear that the coordination between you and the town administrator and others as well to include, it's been a request, as you mentioned, for a very long time, but it's clear tonight here to see the benefit of it being included in the capital improvement plan. This is an anticipated expected cost, and we're moving forward with it. It's a no-brainer here, what's there. But to come back to John's comment, I remember, and we don't have to have this discussion right now, so perhaps this comes up under other business, but I do recall that there was a conversation in the development of the facilities manager position about when, if and when the time would come that the facility manager would coordinate with the schools. And that's a bigger question, completely unrelated to this request, but I think that the coordinated effort here between the town administrator and the schools is paying out in a very significant way. And I think there's a lot of value in back to John's comment about having a facilities manager involved in future decisions like this. But we can, I'm not trying to tie it up in this conversation.
I think I think there is a point here. I mean, that's exactly where I'm going with this, which is I support this, but I want more information before I move for it. And I want the facility manager, I want the capital subcommittee to examine the issue more closely, to find out what the plan is instead of throwing $500 million. So he pointed out it's an estimate based on a plan several years ago. Let's bring it a little closer to the runway here. That's why we have a facility manager. And you know, I don't think you'd object. I mean, that's a town asset. He's got experience down here.
When is this? So you will present this to the.
Yeah, I don't know when the next meeting is.
I think they're trying to set a meeting right now. I think, you know, this conversation, obviously we had the school with us tonight, and we've had discussions about, you know, all getting on the same page with capital in the past. So we'll have a discussion on where we are with the full capital request article a little bit under item 6 when we get into the fall town meeting warrant. But took the opportunity, obviously, with the schools here to go through their request to answer any questions that you had. I'll, you know, make sure any questions that come up or changes through their discussion with the capital subcommittee comes back to you, and I'll update you as we go.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. Appreciate it. Thank you all for coming in.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you for supporting the schools. In the short time I've been in the town, 14 months, and I feel that there's been a lot of support from the town of Holliston and the select board for the school department.
What you're doing. It's very trying times and you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move then back to. We're going to move back to item number 1, the COVID-19 community update. Sorry to be jumping around so much, but it made sense by text and email earlier today to do it this way. I'm hoping it's making sense to everybody in the room. So yeah, back to number 1.
So our numbers continue to be trending in the right direction, despite the fact that there are variants of concern that are making their way through our Commonwealth as well as the nation. What I really wanted to focus on right now is something that we started a discussion a few weeks ago with regards to closing out CARES, and I do have 5 CARES Act requests for the board tonight, and there are so many that actually have to spill over onto 2 separate slides. And I will share them, give you a high-level overview, and if you or anybody has any detailed questions, I can answer them. The first one is a request from the Board of Health for communicable disease investigation. So this will be the third party that does the case management and surveillance of the positive COVID tests. This would be the public health nurse that calls the individual who tests positive for COVID, gives them instructions on how to isolate in their home, how to monitor their symptoms, make sure that if they have any needs that can be met, that's communicated, and then lets them know when their symptoms have subsided and the appropriate time has expired. They then are told that they're released from that isolation. So that's that figure of $9,000 is the voted request from the Board of Health for the period of July through October. Because they understand that the CARES money goes away at the end of October.
Chief, point of order. I'm not sure that's true. I think we have to commit the funds by the end of October. They're available through the end of December.
They wanted them to be obligated, depending on.
So you could obligate the funds now through the end of December, but you cannot obligate funds on November 1st.
Correct. They were insinuating on some of the calls that they wanted you to spend the money by October 29th, because if not, they were going to take it back.
Or back. So I'm just wondering if we're extending the services beyond October in this case for that reason. That's why I'm asking.
Right. Yeah. The guidance that I'd seen said you should finish your spending by the end of October. So that's the way we've been trying to plan. I mean, we can follow up with folks at NTLS.
I'm just speechless. It's just that the state is sitting on so much unspent CARES money, and to watch these kind of directives come down is just, it leaves you breathless at this point. We should be given every opportunity to spend the money we have. Small dollars, I'm not going to hold up the board's thing, but that's my point. I think they're wrong. So, not the first time.
So,
I mean, it's laughable, but it's not. I mean,
yeah.
Come on.
I think I need you to restate that because I'm looking at your CARE snapshot sheet here. You have potential projected budget through balance, through December 31st. But what you just said now is that no, this is October.
Correct. Yeah, because the
mental note
and the spreadsheet had started long ago.
Yeah. No, I'm not criticizing that.
Yeah, and also if you look at that, I had been carrying a much higher figure as well. I had carried a figure of $50,000 for July to December because that projection was based back in the January, February, March time period when we were spending about $10,000 a month. So now the most recent invoice that they had came through just over 2,000, which is why this request for 4 months is only in the aggregate of 9,000. So again, if the board votes this tonight, that projection that we've been holding for anticipated but not voted, that gets taken off. That money, our bottom line unobligated number continues to go up and not down.
That will help with the conversation I think we'll be having in a minute. But okay, so you would like, would you like
so I'm going to give them to you, all 5 of them, yes. And it's up to you as for whether you want to vote them individually or if you want to vote them as a package.
Can I ask one more question about that one before we move on? Because I just, is there a set aside in the ARPA money for this particular?
Yes, absolutely.
Which one am I looking at here?
So it would be addressing the public health needs related to the. Oh, you mean in the
placeholders?
Yeah.
No. Oh, so I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question.
It
is an allowable expense under ARPA.
Yes.
And so if the Board of Health asked the ARPA steering group to put money aside, we absolutely bring that to the board. But I did not proactively put one in as I did.
I would like to see them have something in here because this could be years and it might be, I mean, I'm not saying it needs to be $1 million, but I mean, at least to make sure that we have something set aside if this continues, that we make sure that we have a little bit of money set aside for this purpose because this is very specific and important part of managing COVID.
And far exceeds their normal budget for public health surveillance.
Yeah. So I'd personally like to, I can't speak for the rest of the board, but I would personally like to see something set aside.
I can put that request in through the Google form.
Chief, given that these are not new requests, we've seen these before, and given that the board has weighed in already, just in comment alone on some of these, I think we can go ahead and do all 5 together. Unless John or Ben feel strongly otherwise, I think we can go ahead. There's 2 more on the next page: the Youth and Family Services Rent and Mortgage Relief and a technology request for accelerated telework capacity.
So again, facilities have requested an industrial dehumidifier for downstairs in the town hall, and they had also requested modifications to the barrier that was placed in the building department. The way it is right now, the height is very, very small. They would like that higher. And the vendor that came in and put in all of the partitions, their quote to change the opening configuration of the building department is 2340.
Plexiglass is more expensive these days. High demand.
And then it's also labor to come in and make those modifications. And that will facilitate, and part of the request on page 2 under technology includes some additional equipment for the building department so that they can have a remote station there available for the public, because by transitioning to permitting online, people used to be able to come in and fill out a permit by hand, but now they're being encouraged to use the website. It's kind of disheartening to come in and be told you can't file that in person, you have to use the internet. So if there's a terminal right there, just as we've got a public access terminal for the assessor's office, this would facilitate public access in the permit process.
Improve service level for the public, but also very much, we've seen quite a bit of activity down there during COVID, and this is a response to that.
That's building the need.
Yeah, there are 8 components to the technology request, including an additional Zoom license, an additional desktop camera for the senior center, remote meeting setup similar to what we have here in the room and at several other locations at our emergency operations center, at the fire station, equipment for the remote meeting equipment here in the room to be able to better provide output to cable. There is the equipment for the building department. There's a remote camera for the police department training room. There's a laptop for the police department training room. And there is another remote camera for the police roll call room. So again, this would allow more of these remote meetings to take place in other municipal buildings where right now they would have to gather around the laptop. This would add some similar cameras where there are already existing flat panel TVs in 2 spaces in the police station. And so all total, all in, all 5 requests, $43,070, including the $25,000 for the rent mortgage relief additional round, which Community Action Fund has indicated they have the bandwidth and the capability to be able to process another round of requests, knowing that they need to get those funds into the community by the end of October.
I don't believe even Family Services Advisory Board has met yet. They will soon. So any approval here would be pending a vote in favor by that board. John,
So the rent mortgage relief program will only be for rent mortgage release up to the end of October.
Yes. And when I spoke to the director, she wanted to know what number to ask for. I realized we've still got a big number, so available in our bottom line. So if you wanted to approve a larger number, they would have the Community Action Fund get that up to the community. So
we received a CARE snapshot spreadsheet from you, Mike.
Yes.
Dated 9/13, which I think is today.
Yes.
And it includes, excuse me, additional projections not yet voted.
Yes.
What are those items for? Remote meetings, enhanced internet connection, and public health surveillance.
Right. So that was the public health surveillance was the one that I was talking about, where I had been projecting $10,000 a month a long time ago, but the Board of Health had not made a request. The other remote meetings are things like having the moderator, and what was the third one?
Enhanced internet connection.
So there were.
That's my question is, are we voting on those as well?
Some of these address that category, but not would not necessarily zero them out.
Okay, so there's a little overlap, you're saying?
Yes.
These items all take us to the end of December, according to your spreadsheet. So let's make it right.
I can update the spreadsheet.
I have no questions.
we're still talking about the 5 here. Okay.
I have no questions.
I do, Chief. So if you just mentioned that there's still a significant number in the bottom line, which, and John, we were talking about October 31st, around the corner. 29.
Again, arbitrary.
The town's being conservative and trying to adhere to the guidelines that we're getting. I just know they're wrong, and that's what's aggravating. And I think everybody knows what's going on here, but I believe we can fully and legally commit funds beyond that time frame. But I defer to the chief. This is just aggravating.
You just said you felt like conversations with the director of the services that if the funds were available, the need is there.
Yeah, so what happened was after I met with you 2 weeks ago, I immediately reached out to a whole bunch of departments as you requested me to follow up. And I pinged her. I said, would you have the capability, is this, both your department as well as this CAF, do the two of you have the capability to administer this program again? And the director reached out to CAF. They said absolutely. They had that in their wheelhouse to do that. And then the only question was how much. And so she was open to between 25 and 50. And again, because they haven't voted yet, if you voted tonight, the larger number contingent on them voting it, I'm sure they'll be able to put that in the hands of people in this community.
I would say based on their success, and quite frankly, we were working with other groups at the time who were doing this in other towns, and I would say that using the CAF in this town as the fiduciary the system that Youth and Family Services set up for both privacy but also compliance worked exceptionally well. And so one of the requests that came in through ARPA, actually Chief and I asked the COA to talk also with the CAF, whether they would be a good partner on their request or just for sort of ways to frame their request and the program that they're trying to design, because I thought the rent and mortgage program with CAF's help worked so well. And so again, I mean, if they feel like the need is there, it's certainly the system that was set up, you know, it's I think well done, and it's really how much they can handle or what the need that they see. So if they see the need of 50, right, the apparatus is set up to do that.
Yeah.
And the timeliness of the request, also considering that some other assistance programs have been ending in recent times. So people who may have just barely been getting by, they suddenly find that without that other assistance, they may be struggling in the next month or two to meet that rent payment. And so this is possibly going to come at a really opportune time.
And one of the struggles that came up sort of before the first iteration that the select board approved, and I think the second was that the state came out with a funding source as well. And then so, you know, Youth and Family Services did a great job changing their intake to say, if you are receiving this support through the state, right, to avoid a double dipping situation. They did a good job, as the chief has had to deal with many changes through the CARES Act. Youth and Family Services had to change with that change in the landscape as well, and did a good job. And so that's still part of it as well. So, you know, if that is something that stops them from being able to put funds out the door because, you know, there are certain people who are getting that help somewhere else and therefore not eligible here. I don't know, but again, that would be, I'd leave it up to them. They certainly had the experience there.
This is a good situation to be in, where you know there's demonstrated need. Anticipate that need will continue, and you happen to have available funds at the discretion of this board to use towards that need. So, John and Ben, would you be comfortable to consider a request for Youth and Family Services to not to exceed $50,000 on rent and mortgage relief at this time? Is that something that you would consider? Obviously determined by or dependent upon a vote from the Youth and Family Service Advisory Board.
Okay. I think it's too much with such a short window without a vote. With a vote,
yep.
Yes. I don't want to do that discussion.
Okay.
That's my take.
When are they meeting?
Monday.
Because that's we just scheduled them for Monday.
The allocation will be done.
Okay. They just scheduled for next Monday. Okay. And we have had the instance where they meet on the same night as you, and sure. I get confirmation of their vote, and we time our agendas.
I think the board tonight can make a decision that allows them to move forward on what they'd like to do, and then I think that we could have them come back and re-present a request.
Or you know, like again, the policy that we set out was for independent committees to take a vote before it was brought. I was responding to the feedback I got from the board 2 weeks ago.
Yes, and appreciate that you asked. Yes.
But you know, you could vote the first four and defer a vote on rent mortgage until maybe next Monday.
I'd say why don't we do that? Why don't we wait on taking that vote until next Monday and then get a formal request from them?
My only comment to that then would be is that they have no funds to assist families.
But I mean, if they vote next week, like they wouldn't be able to do anything until they voted anyway. So they would vote next week and we would take it up again next week.
They don't have any CARES funds. CAF has funds independent, which also are available for a variety of different needs in the community. But yes, they don't have any CARES funds available.
Given how fast the weeks are flying, why don't we hold on the 5th of the 5 requests? And Chief, if it's possible to coordinate, if you and Jackie can communicate
absolutely
quickly and on the spot next Monday night, or we have to push it to the 27th.
If we embed it deeper on the agenda, perhaps they will have been able to take a vote prior to it coming up.
Oh, I plan to keep you guessing next week. You're not going to know when you're going to present. We're just going to. Okay, understood. All right, so why don't.
So just to pick this gap a little bit more, this is the June 1st memo that I know you're referring to from ANF, my friend Heath.
Yes.
On guidelines reflecting the October 29th guideline. in general, ANF expects municipalities to receive the beneficial use of CDRF and MP resources by October 29th. Beneficial use goes on. ANF may, in limited circumstances, pre-approve use of these resources if the beneficial use will take place between October 30th and December 31st. I would argue everything we say is applicable to CARES is a beneficial use, and we should be asking ANF to put those expenses through. That's just me. And a follow-up question, if I could. Early on, when we were looking at these spreadsheets, you were kind enough to give us a view of two silos. One was CARES.
Yes.
The other was FEMA.
Yes.
We haven't talked about FEMA in a long time, right? Is this appropriate? I don't know if this is within the agenda scope, but whatever happened to that?
So FEMA is very slow in processing applications for reimbursement. And I'm waiting for us to close out our fiscal year 21 books so that I have a final number to be able to show them of what we expended in different accounts so that I can put those applications in. We'll probably have, I would say, close to 6 or 7 different programs that will be submitting for reimbursement through there.
And isn't it true that it's somewhere along the road during one of those 16 different changes,
yes,
that they changed the reimbursement from 75 to 100%?
January 21st.
And is it retroactive? Is it as of that date?
So that's why I need to do multiple programs, because I basically need to do a March to September, September to January, January to I would argue June 30th, and then I would do a July 1st forward one. So that's why there need to be, and I would deal with school expenses that the town voted to absorb some of those with your July vote. I would do that as a separate program as well, just to keep it clean. So that's why I'm saying there are going to be multiple applications.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Chief, we will move in the direction of voting to approve, not deny, but voting on those 4 first requests. If I will ask you as chair, if you would communicate to the Director of Youth and Family Services that we're awaiting her board's decision. And as chair, I would say I'm willing to entertain a request for not to exceed $50,000. And when we get that request from them the night of or the following week, the board would entertain, I would as chair entertain that request for discussion. And again, thank you for putting out the message to all the departments. It's good to hear that there was a response, and
so many of them, because
what's that?
So many of the departments that you gave me homework for 2 weeks ago basically said, no, we don't have anything additional. Like, technology was one of the only departments that stepped up and was able to find additional eligible expenses. Those others basically said, you've already given us what we need to see us through.
You've done a good job at the CARES Act money is serving our town well. So, okay, so I will entertain a motion to approve the first of the 4 requests. If somebody could do the math real quick, I think that drops it down to.
Lost it. Bring that up.
Let's say 27,000 perhaps, but it was.
That would be.
7, that's page 2.
$18,070.
Yep. 2,070. So I will entertain a motion to approve $18,070 in CARES Act requests for the Board of Health, the facilities rather, for technology. Perfect. Entertain a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Question. These are all one-time expenses. All of this, none of this could extend beyond October 29th.
The only would be the Zoom license, $150 for technology.
So I'd like to make a motion to amend the motion, which being to suggest that provide further that the chief examine pre-approval from ANF on the beneficial use of any and all such CARES Act requests here. So in other words, we want the chief to make the appeal to ANF to say the board has taken this vote. Would like to extend it until December 31st, 2021. We need approval to do that. Won't change the cost, it just changes the use pattern.
Motion on the amendment to the motion.
You got it.
We will need a second on that.
I'll second that.
All in favor of the amendment to the original motion?
Aye.
Aye. All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve $18,070 of Karazak requests contingent upon ANF approval for the use of said funds through until December 31st, 2020.
Beneficial use. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that carries. Okay.
Let's get to the rest of your voluminous agenda.
I'm a little tired from all the gymnastics, to be honest, but and I look forward to hearing back from you next week. Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to move on now to the warrants for this evening.
The warrant totaling $682,485.20.
Motion, do you have a second?
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're going to move on to public comment. John, do you have any public comment?
You got it. There are a number of reasons you deserve these office.
It's one of them because I've entered a new decade.
There's about 50 of them. Enjoy your evening tonight. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
On behalf of everyone, including the mayor.
That's very sweet. Thank you very much, everybody.
It's been just a few items for you team real quick. It's been quite a week. You know, it's often said Holliston goes to sleep in the last day of June when school goes out, comes awake at Labor Day. And boy, did it. It's been quite a busy week. We've all understood the meaning of 9/11 and all that brought to us this past week. We attended American Legion 9/11 Awards yesterday morning. I was humbled and also quite impressed with the awards given out to Holliston's finest, fire, police, EMS, and others who were first responders on cases across our town last year or so. When you hear the details and you see the people that made the decision to put themselves in harm's way, it just brings it all home. It gives extraordinary people serving our community. It was a wonderful, wonderful ceremony. Thanks so much to Steve Bradford and American Legion for sponsoring that annual event. We found out that Bruce Guilfoyle is an unsung hero. It was classic watching that announcement as he was photographing the whole thing. They called his name and he stepped away like, what, me? Perfect and well played. So congratulations to Bruce. And of course, also congratulations to Heather Strangella, I hope we got her name right, and Paul Saunier as being the Citizens of the Year. We'll be hearing more about them when Holliston kicks it into the second high gear this weekend. So that's all I have right now. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, John, and thank you, John. Ben.
Nothing tonight.
Okay. Well, John stole my thunder, which was not to announce it was my birthday, but to
I didn't say that.
which was to say we did attend a wonderful event yesterday, and to those honored, thank you very much. To those who received the awards, well deserved, and to both Senate President Spilka and our representative Carolyn Dyke, thank you very much for being in attendance. It was definitely a well-attended event, and it's a wonderful opportunity to support and show appreciation for first responders here in Holliston. So that is all. Any public comment from those in the room? Any public comment from those on the Zoom call? All right, seeing none, we're going to move on in the agenda to comments from the town administrator. Travis?
Sure. So I have a couple here specifically that we've been tracking over the past few months, and then I'll get into the normal. So the update on the dams working group, we've had a few conversations. The board has asked for updates periodically. So the town now, from previous town meeting warrant articles, has engaged with Leonard Engineering to look at the 4 dams in town. We were at one point out of compliance with the state in terms of just reporting to them on the condition of the dams and our emergency action plans, EAPs. Leonard has us back in compliance. All those things are reported to the state. One of the byproducts that comes out of an EAP and this process is recommendations from this group on how to handle dams that are determined to be poor, of which we do have 2 to 3, depending on the way you interpret the, the grading system. And so with that, the conversation that we had previously at the board level was to put together a working group to look at the EAPs, look at the information we now have from Leonard, and determine next steps. So we reached out to the Concom that has a variety of skilled individuals who overlap with this staff, which includes Matt Zedek, myself, and Ryan Clapp of the Concom, the conservation agent, excuse me, worked with the previous dam inspector, which is a volunteer position that was previously held by Paul Saunier and then Karen Fong. We pretty much put together all the information that the town previously had and now has from Leonard, and began to look at it. The working group got together last week, reviewed what we have, and has come to the conclusion that the best way to move forward is to engage with a cost-benefit analysis of the 3 options essentially that we have for each of the dams. The 2 most time-sensitive will be Houghton Pond and Factory Pond. Winthrop Dam is a great pond and therefore has some connection with the state, although the town essentially has a degree of responsibility for it. And Weston Pond is a little bit on a longer, more 10-year every year. Every 10 years we'll talk about a schedule. So there are 3 options to determine for those 3 dams that we need to look at more readily. Those options are to remove, breach, or replace. And so what the group determined was what we'd like to do now is whether it be Leonard for continuity of service or to engage another firm is to get numbers of the cost benefit analysis of those 3 options for those 3 dams, and then have a community meeting to go through those as we move forward. One of the things that I said that I would get back to that group on is with the funds that are still available through the previous warrant article that we used to pay Leonard to get us back to compliance, determine if that gets us through Leonard or another consulting group that work that will give us a deliverable to have a community meeting with. I don't have that answer at the moment. I'm still waiting on quotes from Leonard and 2 other groups so we can determine that. At this point, I don't believe we would most likely have an article on the October town meeting asking for that. I think we'll be able to do it either through Arbor or our existing funds. And that we would then try to have a community meeting with a cost benefit analysis on those 3 options for those 3 dams prior to our May 2022 town meeting. At the same point, this is something that has been flagged and highlighted on our capital needs list that we have put on the ARPA steering group's agenda to discuss in the future, and also one that I will be having on our needs list as we talk with Rep. Dykema and Senator Spilko regarding state and federal funding that may be available for infrastructure in the future. So that's where we are at the moment. And when I have more on who we would like to engage in the timeline to get back with a cost benefit analysis on those 3 options for those 3 dams, I will continue to update the board. Are there any questions on that?
Just to, well, yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Okay. If one of those dams released and it caused damage to businesses or property, would our insurance cover that?
Yes.
Despite the fact that it's been flagged as the condition it's in and you haven't done anything. Yes. Given the status of the dams, are we in any danger or failure of those dams releasing? I know they're condition, heard about it for 3 years. Is there anything that we should be thinking of like right now rather than waiting around?
So the things that we have done proactively from the DPW, putting in beaver deceivers, which sounds like something that tells a beaver to go away, but is actually a much more intricate system. The things that we've done to keep the dams running as well as they can be, there isn't more essentially that we can be doing in-house to do that. Right? I think one of the things we have to be determining is are we in a position now to be investing significant capital dollars to keep this in place? Because if the option is to remove a breach, then the next thing is going to be the impact to everybody downstream and what that entails. And so that goes into the cost benefit analysis to your point of what it costs us to be insured in the event that those items happen, the deductibles that we end up paying in those instances, and the long-term ramifications for the community. Do we have a what happens if this fails? That is what the EAP is designed to do. It's an emergency action plan. And the next phase of now that Leonard has sort of given us the deliverable that they owe us is to now loop in our emergency management director, and this will dovetail with our mitigation plan, which Chief and I worked on a grant opportunity to update our mitigation plan, which must be updated every 5 years. So all these things are essentially commingled, but the EAP essentially is what we need to do from a state level to be prepared in the event that it fails.
Who's going to give the town the professional recommendation to release the dams or rebuild the dams?
So that is essentially the intent of what we're looking to do to give the town the most information to make a educated decision, is to say, if this were to be removed, here are the properties that the town needs to consider will be affected and potentially have a taking, some sort of easement, or all of those things that would be entailed if we were to remove it. And what is that going to cost the town, and put that so that the town can at least look at those options, right? But at some point, what we're looking to do is give the select board as much of that information as possible for all three of those options: removal, breach, and repair.
I seem to think, looking past Ben, because I'm not sure you were here, but Tina, I thought we saw a document like that at one point from Bernard, maybe, and they talked about the options of release, rebuild, and so forth. I don't want to make that decision as sort of a menu item. I'd like to hear an engineer, environmental person say, here's what we recommend you do, because here's the corresponding impact of not doing it, or something like that. But I think that document, team, if I'm not mistaken, was a couple of years ago. Jeff was here at the time, and I felt lost at the time. I was like, I'm not qualified to make that decision. So as long as we feel like we land in the space where we're getting professional opinion that we can rely on and activate, I'm fine with it. But I was lost after that last document. It was a couple of years ago. Have you seen that?
I'm wondering if you're thinking of the MVP application that we put in, and that we were then awarded the $100,000, and so there was work within that was going to be to assess the dams. And I distinctly remember the same way to this day. When I would say that was sort of the theme of the working group from last week, is like, I don't think there's anybody there that wants to be in a position where they're making that decision. We're absolutely looking for the expert opinion, which comes back to the cost analysis benefit. That is one step in that direction to get what is the right choice for Holliston. I think the working group will actively find the people to provide that opinion. But John, to your question about what do we need to do today to mitigate risk or to respond to a failure of the dam, there was one thing that came up. Meeting was only just last week, so there's not a big timeline here between then and now. Dam safety officer. That was something that's in those EAPs, and so we were going to work to identify how we would put that position more actively in place and use it. So I think that's on the horizon for a task for the town to do.
Yes,
sounds like a fire chief.
It did sound like a fire chief too, but in the past it's been a volunteer.
I would be.
You need another job. That's what I'm saying.
We talked about a third hat that we needed to wear. But John, so there's that. Within that EAP, there are some some individuals who are responsible for monitoring the safety and being on site. I thought when there is a major flooding event, potential major rain event.
Yeah, I like the way Travis described it. Is that there's like a confluence of these studies and past information the town's been given. I need it brought into focus with one actionable item, coupled with some expert opinion, and then we can move on it or hand it off to the state and say, fund it, please. So I've always thought, because of the size of it, hundreds of thousands of dollars, this is a perfect state fund or state grant rather than town resources.
Right, and I made it clear to the working group that, what I do need, what we need to do is present this board, the community, with what the viable options are. And cost may drive it and cost may not, right? Because there may be a solution that is more environmentally friendly but costlier. But in that instance, I'm engaging with the state to make sure that the environmental benefits we're receiving credit to do that through state funding, right? So I mean, those are the types of trade-offs that are going to come. And so Chris Badjek from the Concom, and they have a variety of people who work in this area. That was really, I think he sees the vision of the information that we still need after the Lennard study and the EAPs, and that's what I'm sort of pointing to. And I think the question you said, which is give us the guidance of what is the best option for each of these, is really, you know, one way to do it is cost obviously is involved in any of these. And so, you know, but the benefit as well is something that we need somebody who can look at the three of these, the three options for each of them, and give us a recommendation for each of them.
And I just want to, so upon reflection of that meeting, like as you've thought about it, revisit some of the information, I walked away, Travis, with breach is really not an option. That it's really removal or repair. I felt like from what was presented in the work with the breach, you hear these three, and every time you hear them, you're running through the definition of what each one means. I think breach can fit. One could fairly say today that breach comes off the list as a serious consideration. Travis is not ready to make that statement, so I'm not putting you on the spot to say it. So I'll just share my thought after the work group. The other one was that Houghton Pond is perhaps the one that we really want to focus on. Of the three, Factory, Houghton, and Winthrop, Houghton Pond is the one to probably pay attention to the most. Those are my impressions of this. Yeah, but just in terms of size and perhaps economic impact.
Not bad. Poor.
They're worse than that, they're poor.
Okay, so I will continue to update the group, but that is what how I left that meeting. I'm determining that we have a funding source once I find out the cost to get that information, and we'll try to move as quickly as possible.
And Chief Cassidy is searching up dam safety officer definition over there. He's looking for the uniform.
It falls under the emergency management director. I'm pretty sure. Let's look in the job description. Okay, under B, so update of town council seminar for boards and committees. This is something that I've heard from a lot of boards and committees since I started here, that they'd really like to hear from town council and some of the overarching things of how boards and committees work, the process, and those types of things. So we did arrange to have Jay Tallerman do our contract with MTC, put on a seminar. We get 2 per year for the contract. We have not done one in quite some time. I work with the town clerk on this, and we have Jay scheduled for Wednesday, September 29th. At this stage, I am getting some feedback from boards and committees that they are members, that they are very interested in participating, but would prefer to do it by Zoom. And I did confirm with Jay that he is comfortable with our hybrid format. So the intent of this was to hold it at Upper Town Hall as an in-person seminar. I am going to make it a hybrid option so that people can watch via Zoom. I'm no longer sure that Upper Town Hall with this new equipment will be, due to the acoustics, will be the spot, but I just need to determine that with Chris Mayo, which we'll try to do as quickly as possible. Update everybody that they can come in person or by Zoom. And so thank you to Jay for being flexible on that. I wasn't sure a lawyer would want to be on Zoom, but he's okay with it. Any questions on that one?
No.
Otherwise, all other items of interest, the other ones I have, Sean Reese, James Keast, and myself had the kickoff meeting with Weston and Sampson for the DPW facility feasibility study. Very excited. I think we got, you know, I think there's a lot of quality professionals versus work at Weston and Sampson. I've worked with a lot of them in my history, but I'm very excited about the team that we have. They laid out a very specific process, and they will be getting this information, the deliverable by February, which will allow this board and the community the time to evaluate what Weston and Sampson comes together with in terms of our options for location, what we need out of a facility, and present the select board in the town with a lot of good information to move ahead, potentially with something to design and then later build. So very excited about that. Great group from Weston and Sampson, and everything is on the schedule that we had previously discussed.
Travis, in terms of feasibility studies coming back home to roost, we are still waiting for the Stantec sidewalk study final version, and we are waiting for the water main replacement study.
Yes, so I sent an email to the board earlier that we will have the Stantec group with us on the 27th. So we will discuss after my updates here under the warrant development where we are with those articles. My intention would be the way that we end the discussion with the Stantec team that was in charge of the sidewalks that there was some final information that we wanted in terms of them prioritizing projects, being a little bit more specific on what they would recommend in terms of connectivity, and marrying that with a study that is being done by a separate group within Stantec on the water modernization. So Sean was very clear with Stantec on what our expectations are, and I would expect that we can wrap up and have a very robust conversation on the 27th with the Stantec team on the water modernization study, and all of that information will be available, obviously, to town meeting members as this warrant document is developed.
Great.
The other item, just to mention, and this is something that I think I'd like to wrap up this week, although we may be talking about it next week as well. Some of the feedback that we got from our partners at the State House, Rep. Dykema, Senator Spoka's office, was the way to approach the dollars available through the state and federal government outside of the money specifically that we received for ARPA is to put together a more comprehensive list. So one of the things I'm putting together, obviously, is the capital list that we've discussed, put together by Ali Farhan at our request for shovel-ready capital projects. We also obviously have the ARPA list that we put up earlier that shows needs of a variety of different service levels in town, and then we also have some previous things that we've put on the state's radar and have been approved through previous bond bills that were never actually appropriated. So the intent right now is to put together a comprehensive list of all those items and itemize them, put together potential options. So that when the state gets a little clarity on what they intend to do with those federal dollars, that it is very evident to them how to help Holliston and what would be the best use of those dollars for us. So I'm still working on that. They have our previous capital list that was prioritized, but they've essentially asked for a little bit more, even more information than that, which is potentially great news for us. And so I'm working on that as well.
Travis, could you just remind me the DPW list that Ali Farhan had written, the very first list that we submitted to the senator and the representative's office? Did that have transportation specific projects on it? I don't recall. It was a 2-pager. I recall the first page being primarily water and maybe sewer.
So the way that he had originally done it was water projects, highway projects, and dams. We then asked him at the request of Rep. Dykema, Senator Spoka's office, to prioritize it, which he then did. So it essentially commingled water, highway, and dams. And so we then provided that to them as well. And that's what they're asking for, additional information on. So there's funding sources outside of just obviously infrastructure. So our ARPA request list, I'll include as well, itemize it all, put together a sort of cover page. And then there's a variety of items, right? In previous previous transportation bond bill, there was money for downtown parking, right? We have the 9 Green Street project, we'll discuss in a minute. Sort of marrying those things together to get the funds in our coffers. That's my intent.
Okay. If we come back to that Ali Farhan list, I'm calling it that. I know it was not named that, but the highway portion of it, I mean, we're about to get the final report from Stantec on sidewalk. We already know the vast majority of the information in there, and we know that they identified, I believe, let's just say it was somewhere between 10 and 17 ramps that were on DOT owned sections of the roadway, but they also identified sidewalks in that same area. Then we know we have the Complete Streets project list that identifies many projects on state-owned DOT sections of our Washington Street, Conference Street. So my question is whether I think what we ought to do is when we revisit the list that you're talking about here from these 3 areas, water, DPW, water, highway, dams, ARPA, and Bondo, is that we zone in on the highway piece and that we're pulling in Stantec information and we're pulling in Complete Streets information to bring that to Senator's bill, but bring that to Carolyn Dykema, Representative Dykema, to say there are specific known needs on DOT roadways. If we need to prioritize 5, obviously they're not going to do all of it, but I think that this is a great opportunity because I think transportation is a huge piece of what these dollars are going to be spent on.
So the only separation that I would make based on that is one of the things is our projects on our roadways, which we're looking for funding for, you've also mentioned now a separate conversation, which we've discussed as well in depth, which is state-owned roadway and the need for us to see Mass DOT invest dollars in those roadways. So in fact, I think, and one of the things we discussed previously was having a conversation once we had the Stantec report and the tier 2 report is to then sit down with DOT and explain, here are all of the things that work with both of these lists that are under your jurisdiction. And we'd like to start scheduling when you're going to do that work.
Understood.
So in fact, it's almost another sort of approach to get further funding, but those are projects that they would lead, as opposed to these projects, which are under, we would lead the project, but we're looking for them to do this funding. So they're really 3 conversations almost, but an exciting time with all this done.
I guess, if I may just one more comment, that my impression from speaking with Representative Dyke was very much a large part of this is to identify where the needs are. Right. As much as to say we'd like money for. To say that these are areas that we identify as needs, again, as much as to say that we are looking for money to fund these projects. So I understand what you're saying, like how many conversations are we going to engage in here? Let's be focused on what we're doing. My point would be, let's raise to the level of Representative Dyke and Senator Spilka through this process that we have these needs there. Because the comments that I received, or as I interpreted them at least, is that this is a conversation happening at the state level. And if they're not hearing from their communities where their needs are, when transportation dollars come, either through Arbor or an infrastructure bill, how do they know where to spread it? So this is just saying, we know we have these needs in our community, and let them know that, so when they're entering into those conversations at the state level, they can share that information. So it's really just feeding up information as much as it is saying, hey, help us with the project here. So does that make sense? I'm not sure if I'm being clear on that, but it's really just a sharing of information that that is the point that I'm trying to make.
Actually, I think it's a great point. If I could add a few words to that. So we started this process of trying to get a grip on a plan for DPW to put, a mile of pipe in the ground, pulse it with a sidewalk, and do it in such a way that was meaningful to the prioritization of water pipe and infrastructure placement going forward. So the study was supposed to give us the plan for the sidewalks, a plan for the water improvement of the water infrastructure. As Tina points out, there's this overlapping thing too called the state roadways, which are dreadful in this town. Route 16 and 126 are really in need of immediate overhaul. They're as bad as any other road. So you got that problem too. And it just struck me as she was talking that maybe we should rely on somebody like Ali, who happens to have knowledge of our water infrastructure network, and Sean Reese, of course, who's our DPW director. Help us pull together the data from these reports and synthesize them so that we can see it all come together in a cohesive plan. I don't think Stantec's doing that, Travis, are they?
That's what we had asked them to do, and again, what I anticipate when we hear on the 27th.
So they're going to bring the sidewalk piece in as they've already.
That was what we directed this group and previously talked.
And they're going to give us a prioritization of where the DPW infrastructure work should occur by year and by amount.
That's what we requested from the previous conversation.
And now we have the state piece. Will that be called out by? I'm asking you questions that are detailed, so forgive me. Rhetorically speaking, would the elements of that plan that include state highway roadway be called out?
Right. So this is where I think we're saying the same thing, but I'm having different conversations with different people. Right. When we want the state to improve 16 and 126. We're sitting down in a room saying, here's the information that we have from Stantec, here's the information we have doing the DOT-sponsored Complete Streets program that says this is the priority, and we need you to tell us when you're going to start this project and put it on the DOT list, right? And have Rep. Dyke come out, they're in the room supporting the conversation.
That was true about 6 months ago.
Yep.
But we didn't know about this infrastructure bill, which is going to accelerate the whole spiel.
Right. And no, if what Rep. Dykeman needs is a total list, whether it be state-owned or our, we can certainly commingle. I think generally I've approached it as separating the two. If it's state-owned, it's a conversation that we're going to have directly with DOT as we've opened those channels over the past 18 months with them. And I think we're in a good position to give them a lot of information, whether it be Stantec or the Complete Streets list. and work on them to make sure that they are prioritizing our top needs on those roads. Separately, I'm looking for a long list of things that we have in our town that's outside of DOT's purview that I'd like the state to fund so that we don't have to fund it ourselves.
Again, unfair question, forgive me for asking you this, but when we say that plan said in 2028, 2 miles of roadway on Route 16 is going to be done by MassDOT, okay, through federal stimulus money or whatever. Does that mean that the pipe in the ground that carries the water is done by the state also, or are we responsible for that? So if we have it as a top priority, but the state has it as a low priority, you have an incompatible relationship, and that's where some of this overlap, I think, has to find a place where they talk. So I understand what you're saying. We have to have separate conversations. MassDOT has to be in a different room, but the plan has to be very clear to everybody, specifically the DPW director. Because I know when Ben was on this finance committee, one of the most frustrating things we had to deal with was we had all these prior reports of infrastructure improvements, but there was no plan that said when to do it. And that's what we've been creating. So I'm hoping this all comes together as designed, but as Tina was speaking, certainly the infrastructure issues that the federal government's advancing is really kind of, I don't want to say muddy the water, because I don't think it's muddy. I think it's really accelerating a lot of thinking, because I'm very hopeful we're going to get a substantial amount of investment from the state / feds for those projects that really weren't in our focus 6 months ago.
I have one question about all this. I think I certainly agree with everyone here talking about bringing together water main replacement, sidewalks, and roadway replacement, pushing on MassDOT to take care of their roadways, which they have done not great job at maintaining. And pardon my naivete, I guess it depends on the infrastructure bill in general, but should facilities or anything therein be part of this conversation as well in terms of larger projects? I mean, we're just talking about routes for the schools. Should any of those be included in these conversations, or are we adding another layer that we should ignore?
I wouldn't ignore any of it. I think one of the things, right, to the conversation of what is going to be the best information to get to Rep Dyke and Senator Spilka is going to be, I'll talk directly to them. We have our 5-year capital plans posted, right? That includes facilities, and those are not things that, we have on our infrastructure list that we asked all to put together, because, the way that the ARPA rule was written, which led to us requesting that list, is really about water infrastructure, sewer infrastructure, and some other things that impact, economic development. But we certainly have facilities needs as well that there may be opportunities for, and so no, I wouldn't leave them off the list. But to some extent, we are giving our representatives the information that they're requesting to make sure that they're advocating for.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I just was thinking like there might be some bigger ticket items in our facilities that we're putting off because they are bigger ticket items and we're waiting for something to break. As they pointed out, some of the schools facilities, and I just would hope that we could start thinking, if it's possible to think about some of those things. I would like to, so we're not waiting until they break. But that's just my take on it. But I do think this is about time, and I think the other thing that I think we need to make sure that we do, in addition to this exercise, is to create infrastructure within our own organization to make sure that we continue this momentum for years to come. So that when this money disappears from ARPA or from other state sources or whatever, we're continuing the effort to make sure these things are all working in concert. So we're not the next 20 years from now isn't seeing the same exact scenarios where there's infrastructure that's falling apart or that's problematic that needs to be replaced, and we don't have a cohesive plan to reach those goals. So I think it's important that we create those goals, but we also create a roadmap for future boards to be able to maintain and to invest in the infrastructure properly, financially, and in terms of information, housing. I think one of the things that's so important that I was so eager to see from the Stan Tech reports is to make sure the information is digital, because previously it was a binder sitting on a shelf. And what good is that? We need it to be in our information. We need it to be accessible so that way we can maintain it. It's live. We know exactly what's going on. We know when there's a problem, and we can address it with future capital needs.
I started this right turn conversation, so I'll redirect us back to the agenda and just maybe a summary comment. I think that there's an ask wish list or list, and I think that there's an information list, right? Like, here's what we are asking, and here's the information we're sharing. That is, in my mind, how I'm breaking this down. I think they are separate, but they'd have a lot of overlap. So, okay, thank you for entertaining the conversation slash headache, and is there anything else under your town administrator update? Okay. We're going to move on then to number 6, fall town meeting warrant development discussion. We obviously had the schools present their capital request for the rooftop units, and perhaps we'll circle back around on that. John, I think you had some work that you wanted to, we want to explore a little bit more there. But Travis, do you want to kick that off?
Sure. So again, when we had our conversation leading into the annual town meeting in May, so we have a couple action items here. One, I'm just going to present you essentially where I am with the capital list. So our process here, the capital subcommittee of the finance committee is chaired by Ben Murphy, has been meeting, asking questions so that they're prepared to discuss with the full finance committee recommendations. At the same point, right, this warrant development is going to come through the select board, and so I'm going to present you with what I have. Any questions that you have, I'll make sure I'm working with Ben on those things. Any changes we make, but at the moment I'm pretty comfortable with the list that we have that has come through department heads through planning previously. So when we presented the capital request budget for May, which is a separate article, we then presented also what we anticipated coming in October. So it's really 2 town meetings within a fiscal year, and so looking holistically at all that we spend for capital, putting those articles together. So at that time I indicated I'll present both, just so people see a whole scope. But they are, different requests. And so now that May was voted, everything that was on that list was supported by the finance committee, select board, and town meeting. And so now this list has changed slightly from what had been previously anticipated, but the list has also come down slightly. So let me pull that up now. This is now just looking at October, now that May has been done. And so where I am at the moment, I have it broken out between facilities requests at the top here, and IT requests, DPW, police, and then we have a number of public safety, and then the school rooftop unit that you just requested. The other things that I'm tracking, which we'll discuss separately. So we're under 6A right now of the agenda, it's a capital request. Under 6C, we'll talk holistically about the whole warrant. But we are looking at 2 separate Stantec reports that may require articles. Although again, that is up to the select board. We're looking at 9 Green Street, which I can update you on in a moment. The wastewater treatment plant modernization is a conversation that I think will, probably be sidelining at the moment. ARPA is a potential source. And then there's 2 requests that I was tracking from Parks and Rec that we're going to go through the CPC, although I believe they're now on a May timeline. So where I am right now with this capital list from all departments, James Keys presented the capital subcommittee with his background, which I provided to you previously as well. All of these have backup sheets which explain the request, the impact on future years. 1750 entranceway, town hall doors. This is sort of the final process now that the doors have been replaced in making them essentially with the electronic access. The facilities manager has been working on the HVAC replacement as a phased approach for town hall. There was some discussion at the capital subcommittee of whether we should move up all of the phase years that James Keese had put on his request, his 5-year request, into 1 year. I'm still reflecting what he had requested. Senior center electrical panel, all of those he has reviewed, and the backup has been provided. The IT phone system is the handsets of town hall, and then a phone system for the chief. Again, Chris Mayo has pulled the quotes on that, and that backup is provided to you in the capital subcommittee. The next 2, I'm still scheduling the police chief and DPW director to speak with the capital subcommittee. We had originally had on here a placement of the replacement of the street sweeper. And that was in May as well. We delayed it until October to not lose sight of it. And the conversation that we had on that was we really like to have the new deputy DPW director come in here and determine, looking at the operations, if they feel like outsourcing street sweeping is the right model for the town, or if buying that equipment is going to be the best for us in the long run. It is a $270,000 piece of equipment that is very difficult to maintain. And so, there is certainly, I think it is our best interest to do due diligence to see if we like the outsource model, and give a new person the ability to make that decision and make their request to the select board, FinCom, and the town meeting in the future. So with that, we've removed the sweeper from both May and now October. And one of the things that has come up through select board conversations of the past year, capital subcommittee conversations on needs, and Sean Reese and his staff looking at options of how we deal with snow and ice and can improve service to the community, is a brine applicator system. Actually, I can pull up sort of what it looks like here. Sean has not presented yet to the capital subcommittee and will be doing so, but it essentially goes on the back of a flatbed truck. It goes around. It's relatively environmentally friendly, which is why it's been adopted by a number of communities like Holliston. And it is a pre-treatment system. So you drive around essentially in advance of freezing when you know there's going to be rain or similar events that are going to cause issues that are going to bring out your snow and ice apparatus later. And you apply brine at that time. So this would be obviously an attempt to increase the service level for snow and ice, but it is a capital investment. The other interesting component of this, which, from the capital request form that we put together is available, the annual maintenance and repairs of a new purchase like this is not going to be sizable. But the other notable thing about a snow and ice purchase is that the annual costs are covered through the snow and ice budget, which is one of the more fungible budgets that any municipality has, and that we can run deficits in a snow and ice budget that we can elsewhere. It doesn't mean that we want to do that, but it makes this a little bit of a different budget impact because it's snow and ice. So if there were questions on that I can't answer, obviously I could bring Sean in front of you as I'll schedule him at some point in front of the capital subcommittee. But I think, it is very much in response to this past winter and feedback that we've received as a town of how we can improve our snow and ice response. And so the $90,500 includes not only the brine applicator system, but also the truck, because whereas you can remove it, you need the right truck to be able to place the system on. So in a non-snow and ice season, you can remove the brine applicator, but we don't currently have something in our fleet that we could simply buy a brine applicator and place it on. So that's why the initial capital request includes not only the vehicle, but also the brine.
I'm just curious, in July, is that sitting outside?
The attachment on the back of the vehicle?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where it would be stored. The vehicle could be used in July and we would remove that. But you're asking where the actual vehicle would be stored. Yeah. We have a variety of options. That's a good question as well for our Weston and Sampson team on our needs for storage. And the best way to increase the useful life of all of our equipment for DPW, make sure that we have adequate storage. The police vehicles is the annual request. It's been on the October timeframe. I believe that where we are in the replacement schedule is right on target. The chief's request is the same as always, but he'll be available if there's any questions on whether or not, there are times where we want to scale that back. Instead of replacing 3 vehicles on the schedule, we replace 2. I don't believe this is the year to do that. I think the schedule is proving proof of concept at the moment, and we should continue that. Chief Cassidy has 4 requests here, one of which is essentially shared as a public safety request. The 3 here, he did present his backup sheets to the capital subcommittee already. There were no votes. There were a few questions, but I thought he handled them well. And the other one that I think we can discuss this evening, so I have clarity as I move into budget production mode here, is whether public safety cameras on traffic signals in the Washington Street corridor is supported by the Select Board. 1, if we'd like to see it in this budget article or a separate article. 2, this was also, as you see here, the side note, was put in as an ARPA request. The ARPA steering group had a brief discussion on a few of these types of items and indicated that it is more appropriate to have a conversation through the town meeting warrant to get that. And then, as I said, the final one on here, you've already heard from Keith today earlier, as we took advantage of him being here and scheduled that. So any questions on this? Otherwise, again, I'm pretty comfortable with where this list is. Fits in well with our annual investment in capital. Again, has been pretty well sourced by all of our departments.
My only comment is, again, reiterating that $500,000 cost, that has to be refined. I don't want to just hand $500,000 to the district and say good luck. I think we have to base that on a really good estimate in the scope of work with an expectation of what happens if and when it needs to move. So I think the schools heard us on that, but just emphasizing that point, I think it's a lot of money to place out there as a wild card for a couple of rooftop units. I like that. An idea of how it's going to come.
And you would like the facility manager involved in that?
Oh yeah, that's what he said.
Yeah, I think the Keith is, and all of these department heads, quite honestly, from my past experience, I would say here, a lot of good due diligence on getting the best numbers so that we can put a lot of information into this, right? This is a summary format of a lot of information behind it. And Keith has always been good about getting quotes so that we can get that information. So I think he did receive that, and I'll follow up with him.
Yeah, and the second the roofs go on, we have to put in solar up there. I mean, to me, it's just a ground ball question. We're getting revenue from solar. It's a thing now. And rooftop units, ballast units on flat roofs, easy money. He did it at the fire station. It doesn't take much, but I think once the new roof is down, we can make money there too. It helps offset some of the capital expenses. Thanks.
My other question is, well, actually, it's a two-part question. First is, how much did we spend on capital today?
CapEx 431,840.
We appropriated with 1750.
We appropriated 1750. Yes. So we'll discuss under C here that I don't have the free cash number, but it's possible that we'll put further dollars depending on our free cash number into CapEx as well. But that's a conversation that we can't yet have for finalized.
So Travis, if you could just scroll up a little bit, separate articles under discussion. You've got it on this page because they're potentially capital requests. So you have Stantec sidewalk, Stantec water modernization.
Yep.
We heard from Stantec that it's their report had $600,000 a year for sidewalk infrastructure. That would go into the capital improvement plan.
Yes, so I think we discussed when they were here that I referenced when the 5-year capital document was published. It was the first one that we published in town. So I had to reference a few studies that were in the works. And the number that I had in there at the time was $450,000, I believe, annually for sidewalks. So I'll update that in the next iteration of the 5-year plan. Now incorporating that information. At the same point, from a part of it is the conversation of the planning versus, the actual articles that we put in front of the town meeting. Right, if the intent, right, and this is done in some towns, including ones I work for, where you set aside the number to stick to a plan into an article that has a rolling balance, that's certainly a viable funding option. I think what we've discussed to date has been determining the first project based on the reports that we've received from Stantec and putting on a specific project for town meeting to consider.
Okay, I'm looking to make two comments here. One is we will have ongoing capital requests for sidewalk and crosswalk infrastructure. That is what we learned from the Stantec report, is that's a need that the town has to address. And so my question is, why wouldn't it be in this capital article? Because when we look at the total amount spent on capital, are we meeting our capital needs? How much are we spending on capital? I'm not sure the conversation pulls in those individual articles. I get the sense more so that we go to the one capital article and we add up the dollar amounts and we say that's how much we're spending on capital. So if we're moving in a direction of investing every year in our sidewalk and crosswalk infrastructure, shouldn't it belong under police vehicles, say? Because that's a known expense every year. I'm not asking it to say that that's what I think is true. I'm asking it as a genuine question. Is that in time, not this first?
No, the nature of this article, I understand the question. It's a good question. I think the nature of this article, right, there are some things where you could say that is in the same general category. For example, the entranceway to 1750, right? That's gonna be a concrete project, but you know, due to size and scope, is really more in terms of like refurbishing of that building. And then the majority of this is sort of on the smaller in terms of not completely rebuilding or building a new type of facility, right? Smaller facilities type projects plus equipment purchases is really the idea behind this. I would say that what you're talking about in terms of infrastructure projects, especially if they're going to be rolling, would be a sort of, it could be set up similar to this, but I would not probably commingle the two, especially because of scale and scope.
I can't think of another example, right? So when it comes to the school buildings, they're always under the capital, in my experience at least, they're under the capital request article. Where else do we have rolling annual? So the water main replacement.
The roads.
That's chapter.
Right, that's like the funding source, but I look at it like it's sort of a similar thing to just set aside that money from chapter 90. I can't remember. I always remember 70 and 90. So chapter 90, we set aside specifically to in that way because we have that specific one. I see your point. I don't know if it's
capture it under capital.
But I look at it. You know, I think there's two issues that we have to discuss and have a bigger conversation about is how are we funding it, and should it be just sort of a blanket amount that we say $600,000, $500,000, whatever the number is, and then we just address with whatever projects we need to do, or is it specifically tied to a project? Like, you know, for example, as we do Mudville, we're doing sidewalks at the same time. Should it be? I don't know the answer. I'm just sort of, I guess, adding a little some other questions to. Should it be funded through capital? It's clearly an investment. It's clearly something that we're trying to invest in the town. It's something that I think is a priority, but we have to sort of say, is this just going to be a budget item? It's sidewalks, like we do other things, like roads or water mains. Those have their specific funding sources. And then, is it project based, or is it just sort of a general amount that we replace sidewalks and crosswalks?
I mean, I get and ramps because I guess I thought that's exactly what the statistics
report
had to say is that's exactly what we need to be doing as a community. So perhaps it's not a conversation that's relevant for this particular moment right now, but
I think it's a great point. So let me pull that out then to go under item C of 6. So
okay.
Let me just show sort of where I am fully with the warrant. So I think we do need to answer that question. I think we need to answer it sort of before the warrant closes, which is next week. Which is, do you want to have on a May and October timeframe on an annual basis? Here is the project based on our schedule that is in front of the town meeting. That warrant article does not have, a sunset provision necessarily. We have to actively sunset them. So the balance of that for the life of that project extends, right? That's why we're not building this into the operating budget. Because, and some of the things we do, right, on the highway budget, on top of chapter 90, we also have a capital outlay within the DPW budget that allows them to do projects above and beyond capital 90. It's about $200,000 a year. The town has done that for a number of years. I would say that's pretty, that is a stance that essentially allows us to do things that aren't just, we're not just beholden to the town's funding, right? It can be sidewalks, it can be roads, right? It gives them the ability to have things above and beyond just materials. So the question then becomes, right, is that the proper method of increasing that? I would say no, because these projects that we're talking about, some of them larger projects, are going to span more than one fiscal year, and so to build it into the operating budget, I don't believe is the proper mechanism. To have it in this capital budget, I think, quite honestly, from an accounting standpoint, probably muddies this. This is already a relatively complicated article that that requires the town accountant look at the funding of a variety of different departments and allocate it within one article, which is broken up in subcategories, but it's essentially one article on our books. To build in projects that are going to span even further is probably not the best mechanism. That doesn't mean that an article isn't the right mechanism, because an article can span multiple fiscal years. So to Ben's point and my point earlier, the question really is, do you want to put together this process of the information we get from Stantec from the complete streets and say, here's what we want to do each of these years for May and October. Each article specifies which project and has a dollar amount. And then, we're essentially tracking the progress of each of those to a larger planning document. Or do we want to be saying, we understand that we must be investing X number of dollars. And so, and this is something that I certainly had in both Weston and Danvers, is infrastructure articles that have, we actually had one for information technology as well, where we put aside capital dollars for capital investments. The balance of that article was invested in on an annual basis, and projects, depending on needs, could be moved up and down the priority list based on circumstances. As we're opening a street for Eversource, we're moving up a project at time with that, but we're setting aside those dollars. That's a conversation I think structurally we need to have. And we did the Mudville project. What we can certainly do is take from Stantec the project that we identified for October to say, this is clearly the need, and put that as the article. Or we can begin a process where we're investing on an annual basis. I think the warrant article as a mechanism is perfectly fine to do that. But that's a conversation that you need to have, and then town meeting's going to need to have. Okay. So with that, let me pull up where I'm tracking for the whole warrant at the moment. Just want to make sure. Okay, so at the top, I have the recurring fall town meeting. We had that ended up in December of 2020. We had two articles. One was for budget adjustments, and one was for the consolidated personnel bylaw. At the moment, I don't have anything. My understanding from reading a meeting that I missed prior to Labor Day for vacation was that the select board was discussing a 26 officer. If that was a conversation we wanted to have for this warrant, the mechanism to do that would be an FY22 budget amendment article. So the question really is whether to put that article on, and if so, I would be getting that information out to all department heads this week to let them know that a budget amendment article would be on the fall town meeting, and they would be getting requested potentially to be on that. I don't believe I have anything for the amendment of the consolidated personnel bylaw. Last year, that was due to issues related to COVID about the COLA. And then we also, we created a position out of another position was the HR benefit specialist. The other recurring articles I have here currently listed as 1 through 6, the stabilization fund, pension stabilization fund, which is the new fund, CapEx, capital budget, which we just discussed, the fund transfer to affect the tax rate, which is an article that we put on there, but it's generally not actionable. And then the community preservation fund, which I'm working with Frank Chamberlain. I'm not sure if they'll have any actual requests or just their normal article. So those are the common requests that we have. So I've numbered them here, and the rest are ones that I'm looking for feedback on from the board tonight. So next week we're talking about a full document. Okay. The fund of the legal support for the cable license renewal, we heard from Barry Sims, it feels like a month ago, but I think it was 2 weeks ago, that the Verizon is now closed. The next step is the Comcast. The good news on that is that it's a 10-year agreement. The bad news is that we need to pay the legal fees associated with getting us to that 10-year agreement. I think we would probably, based on my experience, use the same firm. So I have pricing based on that, but I believe that if the town is still interested in covering those legal costs, that we would want that article now. Second one, so I'm just going to go through this list. If anyone wants to stop me, feel free. Otherwise, I'll just ask for general feedback from the group on this list and see if I'm missing anything or anything can be removed.
Would you guys like to let Travis do the summary and then at the end go through the thing?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Fire EMS organizational study. This was a conversation that came out of the FY22 budget development process. We made incremental changes in the fire EMS budgets, which I believe the fire chief, by the next budget process is going to have some good information to report back on. If those made, significant changes, if there's other recommendations that you would make on that timeline. At the same point, we had a pretty robust conversation about the need to do an organizational study, not because we necessarily see changes coming, but more because it is time to look at our model, make sure that we're doing it right compared to changes that have been made outside of just Holliston. I did get a quote from MRI on that. I have a price, it's under $30,000. It's a good group who does it, although there are others, and I would do the RFP for it. Collins Center is a group that will do them. I put in an Arbor request. I had a brief conversation with them, and really, I think it's a good idea to have the conversation with town meeting so that they know the intent and what may come out of it, which is, look, if MRI or Collins Center compares us to other communities and says your model is outdated, you need to make changes, those are conversations that we're going to need to have at a very wide community level. And so I think it makes sense to have it on this warrant as its own article. 9 Green Street construction costs. This is one, I think, what I would like, you received the update from PAR on where they are. We're moving ahead with what we need to do to keep that in compliance with the state. We're moving ahead with getting that structure down because it's quite honestly a liability. We got kids climbing on it and all that. At the same point, we are prepared, and I thought Al did a great job of explaining what that can be in terms of, improving the downtown experience if that were to be what he envisioned, what the 9 Green Street Committee envisioned, and they put together for us. I believe there's going to be quite a few grant opportunities and potentially state money for this. But to ensure that we're moving ahead on a timeline, one way to go about this article would be to say we are looking for town meeting support of this project. We will not incur $1 on the construction of this project without determining that we cannot receive state funding or grant funding. And we have done that previously in Holliston on a CPC project, the Casey's project, where essentially town meeting approved the funding, understanding that there was another source that the town was looking for and would look at ahead of time. That would be one way to approach this. The other way to approach it is to essentially say, look, we have a cost estimate from PAR, who's currently progressing with the demolition, and we can move ahead and invest any other dollars we can get from the state elsewhere for downtown, right? There's 2 different ways, but I think one thing I'd want to know is that the select board is looking to move ahead with 9 Green on the October warrant. The water main and sidewalks, we just had those conversations. So Stantec is going to be with us on the 27th. Before then, what we need to know is that these are going to be on the warrant. And really, ideally, so I can begin to write those articles, the approach that we want to take. We want to take the project for each of these categories and go project based as we did with the Mudville previous warrant article. Are we looking to be broader with that in terms of the town meeting approach? People looking at me, so let's pause.
You were going to go through them all. We were going to.
Okay. All right.
At the end.
The TAC request. I don't have anything officially voted from TAC at the moment. I provided some information to them based on the funds that are currently available of previous, and I've not heard back. So I have this on here as a placeholder. I'll look for some indication when I get through the list. Stormwater management, I have a call. We have a quote working with Sean Reese and Karen Sherman. It says year 4 of the MS4 permit. It says every town is going through. This is not Holliston specific. We are all in the same boat as communities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts on the MS4. The theme of the 4th year of MS4 is phosphorus control plan. But it's very similar to the past 3 years that we've had. It's in a similar price range, somewhere between $50,000 and $90,000. I am having a conversation with the contractor to see what number I feel is an appropriate one for the select board to put on the warrant. The dams cost benefit analysis, I had this conversation earlier on the TA update. I don't believe we need this on the warrant. I think I think the cost that we're looking at to do this analysis, to be able to bring it to the select board and then have a community conversation, can be either covered through the funds that are currently available through a previous warrant article, or ARPA would be very appropriate. The road acceptance, I had specifically under 6B, because I do need action from you tonight. No, I'm sorry, that's the next one. Hold on one second. For road acceptance, we have a public hearing next Monday night at 7:45 p.m. The Highland subdivision, specifically partial Mohawk Path, Indian Circle, and Mayflower Landing. The planning board has completed, has taken a vote to put this on the warrant. They sent it essentially to you, who has the public hearing. We have posted that. The individuals who live on that should have received in the mail a physical mailing indicating that the public hearing is next week. The recommendation from the planning board to the select board will go through next week. It is similar to the conversation we had in May for the acceptance of Summit Point Drive. The drainage, the acceptance of the drainage system is probably the most conversation that we need to have, provided we follow the same methodology we did with Summit Point. We would accept the roadway and the drainage system, and there's a couple other items that we'll want to make sure that are outside of our purview that have been discussed between the homeowners and the developer. I would anticipate that we'll see some homeowners next week, either in person or on Zoom. I would encourage on Zoom, but based on my conversation with the homeowners association, they are in favor of the town accepting the roads. I believe it's the right thing for us to do, where our staff believes that the punch list is quite complete and we can protect the town's interest with a maintenance bond on any future work that needs to be done. And so at this point, you know, we'll be moving ahead with the public hearing on the next week. The second one I have here is what I need action from you all on tonight. The way that the bylaws are written, to have a zoning article on a special town meeting requires select board approval. The planning board would like to put this on this warrant. It is related to an update that you received from Kate Federoff about changes in how the CCC is looking at delivery versus retail, in that we have always considered delivery to be retail. CCC is trying to carve out delivery separately, so the planning board will have a recommendation on an article, but they need your approval to put it on the warrant. I have two other items that I'd like to discuss. I think they're going to dovetail most likely with financial policy conversation that the finance committee will have tomorrow night, and then I believe we'll be coming back to you at a future meeting. And that is to adopt a local option on cannabis revenue that allows us to put it into a stabilization fund, whether we create a stabilization fund, put it into, or our existing stabilization fund. I think it's time that we do that. I had a brief conversation with the finance committee chair, and I intend to speak with them tomorrow night about it further and bring it back to you as well. I know that we had all had a conversation on that as well. So right now I have two here. One would be to adopt a local option. One would be to establish the stabilization fund. I'm personally comfortable if it goes into the current existing general stabilization fund, but I think diverting it directly into a fund is probably going to be in our best interest in the long run. I know Mr. Cronin mentioned that that's a conversation that's been had previously. I think now is the time to do it. And so I'll wrap that up with you. But again, having this on, I just want to make sure that you're comfortable going ahead with that, and then I'll get the actual language used when we move forward.
Can I ask a quick question on that? When you create that kind of a stabilization account, do you have to describe the purpose by which you will draw upon it?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay. But those things.
Right. And so the general stabilization fund obviously is very general. We would need to specifically say how it would be used, and then within that, the town meeting at a future date would be able to work within those boundaries that we set up originally. I removed solar zoning. That was a conversation that the town planner had with Kate. The governance committee, I believe, actually is going to be on the finance committee's agenda tomorrow night as well, based on their previous conversations of what they're looking at potentially for this meeting. Although I've continued to work with Sam, as my anticipation is that the DLS tab report is imminent, and may in fact sort of where they are and where we are on any of these governance type items. Lastly, I need to update this information needed. There is a citizens petition related to critical race theory that has received enough signatures as certified by the clerk's office. And so there is a citizens petition, although what I learned today was that there is potentially a request not to put it on this warrant, but to have it as its own special town meeting. So at the moment I'm tracking it here because the signatures are in. At the same time, I don't know exactly how it's going to look. I'm still waiting on clarity on that. So this is everything that I have at the moment. And so what I would look for from the select board, so I can begin to sort of actually put this document together. Is there anything on here that we're not interested in, want to remove? Or is there anything on here that I'm missing based on our previous conversation?
Okay, so I'm listening to you. I think you're taking a breath twice. Why don't we start at the top, go down, John, Ben, myself, we will add our comments as we go. Travis, if you have a clarifying question or need from us, go ahead and pause us. So the FY22 budget adjustment. So my comment would be if we heard from a liaison, a department we liaison with, that there's a need to do this, let's let Travis know that. If we haven't heard from a department that we liaison with, I think you could make that determination yourself. So I have not heard from any department that I liaison with. I know that the building inspector is a potential out there. You know more about it than I do, but that's the only one I'm aware of for departments that I think I've liaison with them. Sure. Okay. All right, John, how about you?
Don't have any removal requests, Travis. I guess I just point to the very bottom. If the governance committee is going to make a presentation, having it as the second to last article, is that the right place for it? Would it behoove us to move it closer to more governmental requests, closer to 9 green and so forth? So there's that one. You don't have numbers here, so the water main and the sidewalk piece, I like where they are. Potentially, are we looking at costs for implementation that may require debt override or anything like that?
So an override is going to require a ballot question. I don't think we're prepared in this cycle to put an override question.
So we're thinking we receive these reports, we have substantial information to go through with the community. We'll use this fall town meeting as a springboard for that dialogue, vet the concerns, if you will, and that's about it. We're not asking for anything.
I would say we have multiple funding options, including CapEx, depending on the scale and scope of the project identified.
But this would be, sorry to interrupt, but this would be more towards the idea of design and engineering at this time. So we would be talking about, you know, if we, you know, when we did, I think Winter Street was like $70,000 in design or something like that. That's what we're talking about here. So if we pick a project, we would be looking at a design and engineering process that would then define the amount, and that would be on the future town meeting.
That's one way to go about it. So let me just so I understand your question, right? Are you talking, if you're talking about the entirety, let's say 5 years worth of sidewalk projects, right? That's a borrowing. But if we're talking about one project that can be done through CapEx, right? That's a separate article. To Ben's point, there's really two ways that we, if it was one particular project for sidewalk, let's say it was a project that was a sidewalk with water, right? The funding source in the water is going to be the water infrastructure or water retained earnings.
Keep going on. I'll get to my point. Go ahead.
No, if I'm not answering the question, I don't need to go through the buckets.
My thought all along was that we would get rid of the water infrastructure fee and have the cost of water pipe replacement put on the tax base, not the water rate user. And that process involved a comprehensive view of all our public work infrastructure needs, including sidewalks and streets and so forth, that whole cycle. The project, if you will, would be a multi-year project, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, with a cost associated to do all of that. That's a lot of money. And I don't think CapEx or anyone's idea of putting money into a bank account, you know, and trying to pay for infrastructure with a bank account was a smart idea to think of that. I think we should be thinking bonded projects for multiple years that the community agrees on. Mindful, as we always been talking and thinking about, there's this thing up the street that's going to cost a lot of money when it comes. So there was a window of time between the expiring debt from the schools, potentially new debt for a high school, that we were going to try to fill with this type of project, Travis. And it involved looking at the prioritization of that type of an event, having, not so we use the word priority too much, but having then the plan in front of us to show we can get 50 to 60% of the prioritized streets and sidewalks done in Holliston for this amount of money, was really what the game plan was all about. That makes sense. So.
Yes, and I think a timeline to do that particular approach is going to be May, not October.
So then what would we be asking under those articles?
So again, part of that would be, you know, what we're getting out of Stantec, which, you know, again, we set up a timeline to get the information before the October town meeting. You know, we're running a little bit into the idea of it's a little bit tight in terms of closing the warrant, finishing the warrant of what we're gonna be able to do. I think to Ben's point, you know, what we could probably be looking at for October is a project that we all agree is clearly the project that is defined under multiple different studies here, whether it be Stantec's, whether it be Complete Streets, that we can do. There's two approaches. One is to design, engineer, get that authorization now to begin planning those projects. The other is to design, bid, build, put together a whole project scope to do a borrowing, as you mentioned off the top, which is the debt exclusion. That process is going to be better aligned in May because of the ballot question.
I want to jump in here and say that there are a number of projects that are way too small to be tied to a water main replacement. Right, so if you could go throughout town, you could pick a crosswalk, a ramp that provides tremendous connectivity and advances all manner of goals that we have as a community, including those of residents, those of, and so on, that have very little impact in terms of being tied to a water main project. I don't at all disagree with what you're saying about connecting a water main project to a sidewalk improvement. I just think that there are many, many, many other much, much smaller improvements that can be made. And when I look at this article, as you have it written here, I would like to see crosswalk as well. I'd like to see ramp up there. I think when I see sidewalk, that's what I'm thinking of, all of them. Why not a crosswalk?
So
why
maybe
not
it almost makes sense to have, rather than like, because it wouldn't make sense to have a water main and then a sidewalk is for the same project as two articles. You want to have it in one article. So it would almost make sense to have, if that's the route we want to go, is to have a water main for like a big project, you know, whatever is the next one in the queue. And then maybe to Tina's point, have a second article of a smaller amount of money for specific sidewalk improvements, you know, fix 10 crosswalks or, 20 ramps or something like that. So we have a project and then an amount to be able to start improving. That's the approach.
I don't see this as a this or that. I agree with John. I don't disagree with John at all. I also agree with what you're saying. What I'm saying is it's not all in one particular approach. We don't have to address any number of projects off of the Complete Street priority list by tying it to a water main improvement project. When you get into the Stantec report, it changes a little bit because there you are talking about major sections of sidewalk. And I think that approach then that John described is a much better match of the two Stantec reports that we have. But I just absolutely strongly feel that there are a number of projects out there that are small enough in scope and scale. You don't have to connect them to a water main replacement project. And that's not at all to say that when we look at water main replacement, we shouldn't also look at sidewalks. We absolutely should, but I think there's just a...
Well, the point made earlier, if we find that there are a host of crosswalks or improvements that can be made on a lower level, which is fortified the DPW budget and start prioritizing those sections. If it doesn't involve full scale sidewalk replacement, for example, just like a handicap ramp and crosswalks, it's like tack work.
Yeah.
In a way. It could be removed if it's not on the schedule for sidewalk replacement. You know what I mean?
So they're there in front of us, and we have that list.
This goes back really to the whole idea of
go.
a plan coming together that shows the town on a prioritized basis what the recommended schedule for all of this work is, all the way down to the crosswalk. We know we need to work on those. But I guess my point goes back, Travis. What are we looking to ask on these two articles?
So my understanding from our previous conversations was we were taking from the Stantec reports the project prioritization. Out of those two reports, timing those with this October town meeting warrant to begin the process. Now, again, the funding mechanism I think is what we had a lengthy conversation on earlier, whether or not we want to do that project by project or on a larger scale. I think in terms of a debt exclusion, I don't think we're able to do that on this timeline that we're on for October. If there is not a project that the select board feels comfortable moving forward with based on the Stantec reports and or the tier 2 report on complete streets, then that's a separate issue. But based on our previous conversations, I didn't think that there was going to be that issue. I think separately, separating out from the sidewalks, the crosswalks is perfectly reasonable. I just need to know specifically which projects the select board is looking for, and if when we sit down with Stantec on the water report, which we indicated to them, we want to make sure they're tying to the sidewalk report that the select board is not ready to move, then we may have to remove the article. But again, based on the number of items and the number of areas of need, I did not see that as an issue.
We started the meeting tonight talking a little bit about potential application of federal stimulus money for infrastructure improvements. And I think we do expect some funding. I think that's a reasonable expectation. Some of this work could fit quite nicely into that pot of money. We won't know likely by town meeting what that infrastructure looks like, a bill, we should say, and whether or not we qualify, i.e. the state and so forth. So I guess I'm asking rhetorically now, should we simply look to, as a board, not a town meeting, receive the Stantec report information and process it this fall as a potential item that comes off here, goes into the spring, because we want to see how much the potential project can fit into these federal stimulus projects and so forth. Is that an alternative approach here rather than exposing the articles to the town meeting this fall with a lot of open questions about whether or not there's going to be federal money to pay for this? Like, why would you ask the town to pay for something if we think there's a really good chance that that's what?
I think generally, to answer that question, we have the same issue in terms of, just take the fire EMS organizational study, right? A valid criticism of that would be to say that falls under a category you can pay for through ARPA. Why are you asking town meeting, right? There are plenty of categories here where we're going to potentially be talking about multiple funding sources. But one of the things that I would say from the federal funding angle of it is we don't have a shortage of needs for infrastructure projects in this town. I would look at the potential opportunity through the state and federal government, our own ARPA funding that we receive directly, and town meeting as potential ways that we could kickstart a lack of infrastructure investment over the past X number of years, but we shouldn't pass up opportunities for us to handle the projects that you see as priorities simply because of the ARPA funding. That doesn't mean that again,
I'm not forsaking it. I'm talking about the time.
Yep, no, I understand.
So tell me the benefit of having this done now in October, where I'm still not clear what we'd be asking the town for. If it's not a large bucket of money to get the work done, what are we asking to approve the article?
So from the Stantec report, again, I believe the chair has quite a long list as it relates to the complete streets report and what those priorities are, some of which fall within the state purview and Mass DOT and the conversation that we'll have with them. And some of them are owned by us. And if we're going to have, there is not the funding within the DPW budget to adjust to address that list right now. So if we're not asking October, then the next time we're addressing that internally is either through state funding and talking with Rep. Dykeman and Senator Spoka, or the FY23 budget. So October is really the ability to take a number of reports that we've received. One is from the complete streets, one is from Stantec. Now we did send them back and ask them to do more work, but that work is, my anticipation is being done, is going to be reported to you. But certainly if you don't feel comfortable with that information going ahead in October, I'm not encouraging you to just put something on for the sake of it. My thought more is on most of these reports, the low-hanging fruit when they're presented to you is what I'm looking to begin this process on. Now I understand what your thought is tie it all together, do one large authorization to attack the whole problem. But I also, my fear when I look at any of these things in terms of capital planning is losing these opportunities. The time period between October and May is substantial in terms of that opportunity to do a project or get it underway.
So if I hear you correctly, what you're suggesting is there are priorities within at least the sidewalk piece that can be parsed out. They're not the larger sidewalk infrastructure public works initiative. It might be scaled down components the team are recommended, smaller pieces.
Yeah.
That's ready for prime time because you can always do a sidewalk, you can always do a crosswalk or a handicap ramp, and getting the funding for those. That's what you're saying. Yes, that's a CapEx. That's probably a CapEx expense.
Yes.
And I would also add to that is that I think it's important for town meeting to get an opportunity to chime in a little bit about some of these things. And I almost like, I mean, I think you've suggested it in the past is that maybe potentially, you know, we could fund something through town meeting. And I don't know which projects it is. I don't know what the right, you know, place to put it, a water main or sidewalk, but I'm saying that maybe town meeting has the opportunity to say, yes, we like this is good, go forward. And then ARPA could come in and fund. Could overtake that money and then free that money back up into.
It's hard to sell though, Ben, when you know that I won't say promise, but that opportunity looms, and you stick it out there as a carrot, say to the town or the finance committee, you know, it's going to cost $10 million.
Yeah.
There's a good chance we can get $5 million from the feds, but right now we're asking you to commit to $10 million. A lot of them are thinking I'm making a $10 million decision.
But I also, you're right. And I mean,
that's hard.
It is, but at the same time, I think one of the things that I think has happened in the past is that people were always like, somebody else will pay for it or somebody else will take care of it. And I think we need to sort of put it in front and say, look, this is a priority. We want to do this. There may be alternate funding. We need to move ahead.
Yeah, we're saying the same thing. My point though is if you wait till the spring, you will have a better idea on that answer rather than guessing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're probably right. I think probably for the water main, and then probably like to your point about sidewalks, maybe it's a smaller figure that we can start addressing some of the specific issues that Ms. Hine has that she's suggesting.
I would say if anything were to be removed, I think the water, due to the nature and the lead-in of a water project, is the most likely. I think, unless I'm sort of reading the interpretation of Stantec sidewalk information and the complete streets process, that I don't believe that we're lacking opportunities to advance here in October.
I agree with you, Travis. We have been signaling to the community for a very, very long time that we prioritize. Number one, we hear them. We hear them when they're asking for improved safety, improved access, improved connectivity. We've been signaling that time and time again, and we are making steps in a lot of different ways to address that. This, to me, taking a project off of the complete streets list and bringing it to town meeting satisfies Ben's comment about let's see how the community feels. You put an article before them and they approve it or they don't approve it. You get a very strong signal yet again from the community that they support this type of spending, in this case, at least on a small scale item. I think it also, it is proof to what we've been signaling. We are committed to seeing safety, we're committed to seeing accessibility and an investment in this type of infrastructure. We're committed to seeing that, and here's an article, again, small scale, that shows that. To my point earlier, I absolutely feel that many of the projects on the complete street list do not need to be tied to water main replacement, because I don't think we're going to find that strong connect. How do you say a crosswalk has to be tied to an entire water main project? One could make that argument. I just think there are plenty of examples where that's not going to be the case. I think we need to keep the sidewalk article on there, and I think it needs to be crosswalks and ramps as well, not just sidewalk. And I think we need to pick a project off of the complete streets list. I think we have plenty of examples of where we can connect it to expressed, demonstrated resident concern. I think there are plenty of examples where we can connect a project from the complete streets list to a known safety concern. And I think we need to move forward on that and demonstrate to the community that we have made this commitment. And I think in doing so, we will see how the community responds at town meeting. And with that, then we can turn to many other places and say this community cares about accessibility through sidewalk infrastructure. And that will only serve us as we move forward to make the case to both the state, and to town meeting again that the bigger projects are something we need to fund. So I really would like to see the sidewalk article remain, and I would really like to see it be something off of the complete streets list. I've given some examples just that connect to all sorts of information we've received. I don't know if you want to go there in that level of detail, Travis, but I'm just going to throw out project number 27, which is the Linden Street crosswalk. We had a child hit in that within the past 3 years on the way to school. We know it's a safe route to school point. We know it's a tricky intersection. We have resident emails and letters to us. We have letters from a child, one child in particular, recently. We know this is a known need. It's on the list. I see no reason why we cannot turn something like that project into an article and put it before the town and ask for them to fund it. That's what I see when I see that sidewalk article. And that's not at all to disagree with what John is saying.
Then it's a different article. It's the crosswalk and handicap ramp improvements that would not necessarily be part of the infrastructure, the sidewalk infrastructure that would be complemented by water pipe strategies.
But the only thing I totally agree. I think that makes sense. I just want to make sure that we don't have something that we're going to put some water main, so we don't build a crosswalk and then all of a sudden, and that's the only reason I'd want to make sure that we're cognizant of those water mains, that we're not doing.
And you know, to be honest, the devil's in the detail, right? Because when you're looking at, say, the Linden Street crosswalk, you're looking at the rapid rectangular flashing beacons that are on either side of the road. The water main runs down the middle. Right.
So in effect, the article becomes, from the Stantec report, the article becomes more of the immediate safety improvements that we recognize to the community strongly desires. We decouple the infrastructure, long-term infrastructure improvement, which I think Stantec is really giving us, right, with respect to sidewalks.
The ramps that they identified on Washington Street are ramps at that Linden Street, right? So when they numbered out the ramps that are in need of repair, it includes those two. So you're addressing a Stantec identified issue as well as a complete street project.
Sure.
I get what you're saying. Travis, is this helpful?
Yes, no, I mean, I think by next week, right? And I think, there's certainly a potential when we hear from Stantec that my only concern is we regret removing the water.
Yeah, I don't want to remove it tonight.
Okay.
I want to wait to hear from
okay.
Yeah.
But you asked for feedback.
No, absolutely.
And I'm leaning in the direction of thinking strategically, let's do it all at once with the benefit of knowing what this federal stimulus money could be for us, how likely it is we'll get it. We put a lot of pressure on our friends at the State House to say, look, we're coming up with this Springtown meeting, gotta know what we have. And hopefully they'll know by that. What can be committed our way against our plan, because that's what they want, a plan. We'll give them one. And we'll give them the benefit of time to tell us how much they give us towards it.
And it'll give us a little time to work on some of those other things. Since we're talking about funding sources and things like that. I think we can have a bigger conversation about all of those things together. And this is just not enough time to really get to that.
So I think the article, the sidewalk article, is modified. It becomes a street article. That's up to you, Travis, to wordsmith that. I'm thinking it's a imminent safety improvements, that we've been made aware of in the Stantec report that the town should hop on.
Fixing specific crosswalks and give here's the 10
and ramps that we know we need to do.
We want to fix.
And that can be costed out and done without delay. And hopefully it doesn't collide with the next 2 to 3 years of projected sidewalk and water pipe replacement.
Travis, you had asked about dams.
Yes.
Would like to see that come off.
I believe it can come off because I believe where we are with that in terms of getting this cost benefit analysis that we discussed as a working group, I believe we can do without an article.
John and Ben, are you okay with Travis making that move at this point in time, or do you want to keep it on there for another week?
Take it off. I'll take it.
All right, so come off. Comcast cable, in terms of an estimate, are you just going to use basically at this point in time the Verizon number from 2?
Yeah, it was 24,000 on that 5-year agreement. This is a 10-year agreement. It might be a little bit more complicated, but in terms of economies of scale, I mean, it would probably be up to 30,000 is the quote that I have. So that's where I am.
On the zoning bylaw, you're looking for the, do you need a vote?
I do. I need you the motion would be actually pull up from the town planner. So you'd essentially be allowing a zoning article on the fall town meeting. So the motion would be, are you ready to?
I have a point of clarification here. You worded it in previous emails and here in the packet, it's required for a special town meeting.
It's the fall town.
All right, so it is absolutely needed for this October's fall town meeting. All righty, so go ahead. Yeah, I think we're ready to consider this. So the motion would read as?
So the motion would be to place this on the warrant, the fall town meeting, and allow it to move forward under town bylaw as well as chapter 40A, section 5. So the planning board can schedule a public hearing.
All right, so I will entertain a motion to allow a zoning article to prohibit cannabis delivery as permitted under section 40, Mass General Law 48, section 5, and town bylaws. I totally flubbed that, hang on.
So you're just taking, the motion is to allow a zoning article on the warrant for fall town meeting under the town bylaw and chapter 48, section 5. This will allow the planning board to schedule a public hearing.
We don't need to specify what the zoning bylaw, zoning article would be. So, okay, entertain a motion to allow a zoning article for this October's fall town meeting under section Mass General Law 48, section 5, and town bylaws.
So, second.
All in favor? Aye. Squeak that one through.
Right, and so we will have the select board will have its public hearing next week on the road acceptance article. Planning board will schedule its public hearing on that article. You know, we heard again on some of that information, but really this is putting it to town meeting to impact how the town is going to go ahead. Right, it's already taken action on recreational retail. It cannot take action on medical retail, and we have HCAs as it relates to manufacturing and cultivation. So this is really just a different subsect, and so it's making sure that town meeting has weighed in on this particular item under CCC's new guidance.
Okay. Did you want to go back to the capital request article and consider the one ARPA request? I think you had mentioned at that time that you wanted board direction.
Oh, yes.
On the public safety cameras on traffic signals, I know.
Yeah, so I think the option, if the board is comfortable with that request, and obviously if there's any questions, the fire chief is here. It's a request that's come up previously, and one of the questions that came out of the capital subcommittee, quite honestly, is probably more of a policy discussion, and so they just asked that it be considered, and I think the chief is prepared to speak to it, and that's how the data is handled. But again, from a finance perspective, I think the request has not changed substantially over time. I think really what I would look for is if the select board is in support of putting it on the warrant, whether it be in the capital outlay article, capital budget article, excuse me, or as its own standalone article. So that would be the question of whether or not to put it on, and if so, in which method. And if there were questions, obviously the chief is here to answer them if that's necessary.
John and Ben, do you have any comments or questions? Ben?
I think it should stay in capital personally. That's
in terms of streamlining the warrant, it makes sense.
I think it should stay on capital and speak to it. Got policies to manage the change.
Okay, so I think the direction of the board would be to leave it as written here as a capital request within this article.
And yes, at this time, so my expectation is next week you're going to have a rough draft, but the draft of the warrant for anybody in the public who's still interested or thinking about putting something or requesting to put something on the warrant. The warrant is open through September 20th at 4 p.m. You can contact my office to get anything in. If you have any questions, obviously you can reach out to my office. So when that warrant closes next Monday, we'll meet later that night, and we can be prepared to get a little bit more in depth.
Before we depart from this topic, Travis, earlier today you and I exchanged an email, and I'm probably adrift on this, but can you remind me where we left off for a well water source study by Stantec?
That was in the scope.
Which one? Water
for the modernization study. It is in the scope of Stantec's report. So when they meet with us on the 27th, I would anticipate that is included. Certainly a smaller component in terms of the way we anticipated the study.
The way I understood it is that they were basically going to determine if they needed to go further to see if there was a need for the town to put in another well, and they would give us that information.
So that was in the scope of the report.
That was the $15,000 item. I just want to make sure it was still part of it. Thanks.
They may not need to do it, so they might drop. They might say it's not necessary. The only other thing I would ask is, do we want to talk about the cannabis revenue stabilization?
You had presented it as it was going to the finance committee for their
I'll discuss
financial
it
policy
tomorrow night.
Right.
You know, in terms of, and this was a conversation I had, you know, if it was going to be written in the financial policies, and I'm happy to have a conversation with the finance committee and select board together, whatever, you know, the timing to do it, I think, is in October. So we should probably, even if we still have some things to work out from the financial policies over time, that we should have an understanding of what's going to look like on the warrant. And in that regard, you know, the local option really has a couple of things that we would need to determine. One, do you want all of the funding to go into stabilization, and then at that point it's up to a future town meeting to appropriate out of it? You can also, you have to do, if you adopt a local option, you have to do a minimum of 25% into a stabilization fund, but you could do 25 to a stabilization fund, 75% to the general fund.
Sorry, is all that in the current draft financial policy?
No. So in the draft financial policy, what I left to both groups to sort of consider is that right now, with the sort of the reserve buckets that we're looking at, one way to take one, you know, I've been wording it as one hungry mouth of a reserve out of the, you know, annual need to appropriate free cash into, is to say, you know, the general stabilization fund could be taking the cannabis revenue on an annual basis. We can evaluate, because that may fluctuate. We don't know what it's going to look like. It is variable. That on an annual basis, we can look at what went into that fund through the cannabis revenue, and then decide if we need to go above, or if it is too much revenue and we need to appropriate out of stabilization. And then the other alternative is to have all that revenue go into its own stabilization fund, which then we just need to set the guardrails on.
So I'm in favor of the latter. And I think the guardrails should be guided by obviously the state law that defines what we can use the money for. I'd lean on Kate to come up with some language that other communities have done. This has happened all around us. We're late to the party. We've been putting that money to general fund for a long time.
Right. So I would say, you know, generally speaking, the way that I've heard this community speak about it in terms of cannabis revenue is really going to be to support youth and family services / school type initiatives, and then obviously the police department in a variety of different ways, public safety in general. Now, you can broaden those, and then the conversation that I have with Kate Federoff is, you know, there have been towns that made strategic decisions to make a stabilization fund specific to, we're gonna use these funds as they build over time to create a council on aging building that we didn't have in our town. Now, they did that because they knew who their audience was at the town meeting and what it was going to get the support from, but they did it, and they did it successfully. I would not recommend that. I would recommend, though, at the same point, making it relatively broad to allow the town in the future to say, this is a project that we would like, you know, falls within the general parameters, but is benefiting the town, and we're making that conscious decision. So, again, you know, the general stabilization fund is just one mechanism that currently exists. In terms of looking at this warrant, if you don't want it to go into the general stabilization fund, it's just a separate mechanism where we have to have the article to adopt the local option and create the fund. and then, you know, just set up the guardrails and move
So
forward.
chicken egg question back to the point though, for the financial policies, does this language need to be in there now or after the language is approved at town meeting? How do you approach it?
So the chicken and the egg is a little bit forced by the warrant closing on the 20th. And so I kind of need, and this is why I intend to have the discussion, I previewed slightly with the chair that I intend to talk about tomorrow night, which is, you know, if the select board is in favor of this, I would hope that the finance committee would be as well. I think it's the right decision financially, and I think that it's something that everybody can agree to. But that the warrant is going to press the issue and make us make that decision now. So if the select board is in favor, as we just sort of discussed, of saying, yes, we want to adopt the local option, and yes, we want to do it as a separate fund, then I would look tomorrow night to have that conversation with the finance committee and sort of make sure that they're in support.
Right,
as
so
well,
now-
and we would wrap it into the financial policy.
All right, so now, okay, so now we have a consensus, but when do you envision us approving the financial policies?
At this point, I'm waiting on seeing in writing and my vote with the finance committee is recommending, and I believe from my understanding that that's going to happen tomorrow. So within
The agenda item is to review and vote on the policy.
so on the agenda.
Okay, so this item, if it's in there, has to be contingent upon a successful town meeting vote. I guess that's my point.
Yes.
Yeah, got it. Okay, I'm good. Thanks.
Are you clear with the consensus from the board on those two articles?
Sean's favorability was the separate fund, I guess.
Yes.
Is that everybody's?
I'd like to see the language on a separate fund. I definitely want to see it separated in some capacity. I'd like to see the language on that. A separate fund. I'm tapping on that one.
Tap in on separate fund.
The separate fund. I'm definitely in favor of the local option.
Okay. All right, we'll get that moving. And get the language so that you can understand exactly the mechanism there. I believe that's what everybody's going to want to see. So I'll try to move as quickly as possible on that. I do have, obviously, I've had a conversation with Kate Federoff, and it really is, it's going to be to take the general parameters from statute and make it all specific. So
Charles, last thing you had asked, how does the board feel about 9 Green Street? You specifically called that out on that article. Unless you hear from John or Ben, I think you go ahead with the 9 Green Street article for construction costs. We've had any discussion to say anything other, so because you'd asked about it, I don't see the need to do anything with that article except leave it in and move forward. Okay. Are we okay on this one?
we are.
Are we okay though?
I think we're okay.
All right, so we're going to move on then. Travis, you're all set. We're going to move on to board business.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of July 26, 2021.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of August the 16th, 2021.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of August 26th, 2021.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So those two carry. Thank you. Have a driveway widening on Maple Dell Road.
I believe we have the resident.
Okay. If there's anybody on the call who would like to speak to the request to widen their driveway at, the address is
21 Maple.
21 Maple Dell Road.
Make a motion to approve the request to widen the road, excuse me, the driveway opening. 21.
Hello. Hi, this is Julie DeChico at 21 Maple Dell.
Hi, Julie. Thanks for hanging in there with us.
Yeah, family went to bed, but here I am 3 hours later. I think because I hung in there for 3 hours, I should get like 30 feet approved. Is that how it works?
Not at all. And you're requesting 20 or 24? Tell me. I've got it right.
So I'm requesting as much as Holliston will allow us to have. So right now we have a truck, a large SUV, and like a crossover. We have no driveway per se, you know, it's just kind of grass and it's where the 3 cars are parked. I'm later here in the house, but the homeowner's been here her whole life. And basically we just use we'd like to have the driveway, the width that we've been using it, even though it's just grass and dirt. So ideally we would just love to have a 30 by 30 driveway, you know, just where we use it now today. But I understand that's probably unlikely. So we'd like it as wide as possible so that we can maneuver the third car in to the driveway. The truck is used for construction for my wife's business or job, I should say. So we're often, you know, the doors have to be wide open and toolboxes in and out of the truck and everything. So we need that space to kind of make sure everything's maneuverable.
Okay, we've seen a number of these and we get the same feedback every time from Sean Reese, the DPW superintendent. So the max opening for town property for residential is 16 feet, excuse me.
Right.
And so the recommendation here is that the board approve 20 feet. And we have
yeah, if that's the most I can get, then I mean it is what it is. I mean,
motion to approve 20-foot driveway on 21.
Okay,
Order, Lane.
Maple Lane. Sorry, Julie. All right,
okay.
we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Julie, so the approval is for 20 feet.
Okay, thank you. And then how would I move forward with whatever company we choose to go with? Do I get something to show that, or do they get that from the town once I choose? Like, how does that work?
That is a great question.
You'll receive correspondence from my office if the vote is taken. That should get you what you need.
Okay. All right. Beautiful. All right. Thank you much.
Any other questions? All set?
Yeah, it is. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Good night.
You too. Bye.
All right, so we're going to move on. Proclamation for Citizen of the Year.
Citizens
of the Year. Yes, John, please.
Our pleasure this evening to recognize two Holliston citizens. First is Heather Scarangella. Whereas Heather moved to Holliston in 1998 with her husband and two sons, and whereas Heather has given her time and talents to numerous organizations in Holliston, and whereas Heather is passionate about education and helping every student rise to the top of their potential. Whereas Heather is the former president and vice president of the elementary PTO, and whereas Heather was a member of the district planning committee and the parent representatives of the Miller School Council and co-chaired the Miller School Playground renovation project. And whereas Heather is on the grant committee for the Framingham Union Aid Association and a volunteer at the Salvation Army and Christian Ed Committee. Now, therefore, we, the Select Board of Holliston, do hereby on September 18, 2021, announce that it is Heather Scarangella Day. Next. Proclamation, Citizen of the Year for Paul Solomon. Whereas Paul moved back to Holliston from New Jersey in 1979 with his wife and two sons and his collection of mini cars to be closer to family, and whereas Paul is a volunteer at the Holliston Historical Society and a past member of the Conservation Commission and the Board of Water Commissioners and a member of the Knights of Columbus, and he designed 4 Habitat for Humanity houses, a cameraman for HCAT, one of the members of the 8-Arch Bridge renovation project. Whereas Paul was also part of the Voice Committee and the former Dam Safety Officer. And whereas Paul organized the Father's Day breakfast and car show and a trustee of the Upper Charles. Whereas Paul, an engineer by trade, is a worldwide traveler. Whereas Paul was co-owner of the Holliston Reporter for over a dozen years and is known for his dry wit commentary of the police law. Now, therefore, we, the Select Board of Holliston, hereby on September 18, 2021, announce that it is Paul Saunier Day.
Congratulations.
Circulate these for signature, but then there's the proclamation for both Heather and Paul. We'll see them Saturday.
I wonder if there's a float as they move down Central Street.
Right. Just a general announcement: the Celebrate Holliston event will be held this Saturday, September 18th, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. It is a street festival, Central Street. So be there at B Square.
And then we have an appointment for the Open Space Committee. 2 appointments for both Shaw Lively and Carrie Marsh Lescopo. with terms to expire in 2022. So do we have a motion?
Motion to appoint Carrie Ann Muskoka and Shaw Lively to the open space committees.
Motion, do we have a second?
I will second that motion.
All in favor? Aye. And thank you to Shaw and to Carrie for stepping up to serve. We have a request for a one-day beer and wine license for Arcadian Farms, September 18th from 12 to 4 p.m. Motion, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that carries. All right, other business. John.
This time.
Okay, Ben.
Nope.
Travis, just one, or it's actually, I believe, it's going to be for Chief Cassidy. When you come back next week, or he was just thinking he could close his eyes over there, getting late. When you come back next week for the Karazak update, would you prepare or perhaps it's Travis, the liquor license relief that we offered before? Would you prepare some sort of presentation for the board for consideration for this year? Okay, so we're going to, I will entertain a motion to enter into executive session for reason number 3, which is to discuss collective bargaining. And we will not return to open session. So I need a roll call vote in favor of the motion and a roll call vote.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, John?
Aye.
Ben Sparrow?
Aye.
Tina Hine, aye. We are now going to move into executive session and we will not return. Good night, everybody, and we'll see you next Monday.